Everybody, we're about to get started. If you want to find your seats, please, council. All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the November 3rd, 2021 Grants Pass City Council meeting. And we like to get started with a moment of silence, so please join me in doing so. And please rise for the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
My name is Meredith Harris, City Council.
Is now joining.
Hello.
Who was that we had online?
Hello.
Oh, okay.
I'm
Hi.
joining the meeting. This is,
Meredith, could you please mute yourself?
I will.
Thank you. All right, looks like we have all counselors present this evening. And thanks to everybody for wearing your masks tonight. That allows us to keep meeting in public safely and complying with the governor's orders. First up on our agenda tonight is a public hearing. So at this time, I will open the public hearing to consider the application rezoning properties located at 3322 Leonard Road. We will begin the hearing with the staff report, followed by a presentation by the applicant, statements by persons in favor of the application, statements by persons in opposition to the application, and an opportunity for additional comments by the applicant and staff. After that has occurred, the public comment portion will be closed and the matter will be discussed and acted upon by the council. Is there anyone present who wishes to challenge the authority of the council to hear this matter? Do any councilors wish to abstain from participating in this hearing or declare a potential conflict of interest? Rick?
Mayor, I need to recuse myself. I'm representing the applicant tonight.
Thank you. Are there any counselors who wish to disclose discussions, contacts, or other ex parte information they have received prior to this meeting regarding the application? In this hearing, the decision of the council will be based upon specific criteria which are set forth in the Development Code. All testimony which apply in this case are noted in the staff report. If you would like a copy of the report, please write that on a note to the city manager and one will be provided. It's important to remember if you fail to raise an issue with enough detail to afford the council and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issue, you will not be able to appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals based on that issue. The hearing will now proceed with a report from staff.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. I'm Brad Clark, the Community Development Director. On the screen, you'll see that Ryan Nolan's name is there. He was the assigned planner for this project and worked with the applicant all the way through. Unfortunately, he's, oh, you don't see that on the sign, do you? I guess we'll wait for that to be posted here. You able to hit that, Julie? All right. So now you can see Ryan's name. So I'll be filling in for Ryan. He was the planner on this project, so I will do my best to kind of walk you through this application. You do have in your packets tonight all the background materials, and we'll be referring to those at a few times. So this is an application that you don't see very often. It's a zone map amendment, a rezone. This has come up over the last year as we've been working through the urban growth boundary rezone project. And as the council may recall, many times in that process we have stated that applicants have the opportunity to file for rezones on their own without the city doing that process. And this is an example of that. after the adoption of the city's transportation system plan last fall, it did free up in our code a number of properties and applicants for them to file rezone applications on their own. So a part of that is the comprehensive plan, and that's really the basis on which the zoning is done. It's the foundation of Oregon's land use system. There's a set of 19 statewide planning goals. And on the right side, you can see the basic order in which that happens. The Oregon sets those statewide goals. City adopts its comprehensive plan, and then the zoning districts have to align with that comprehensive plan. So the property we're talking about tonight, as the mayor stated, is on Leonard Road. Leonard Road is here, here on the south side of the property. There are two parcels involved. This is the extreme west edge of the city's urban growth boundary. It is zoned residential on all sides other than across Leonard Road. On the south is Redwood Elementary School, directly across the street. So the existing zoning today of the property, this brown color is RR5, that's a Josephine County zone. And you see on the left that most of the existing zones are that, other than the yellow, including Redwood Elementary School, is zoned to R18. The R18 is a city of Grants Pass zone, and all of the other surrounding zones are Josephine County zones. So the proposal tonight is to change that RR5 zoning to an R2 zoning. R2 falls in that moderate density category for the city. And the comprehensive plan moderate zone does allow for an R2 zoning district. So there is not a change to the comprehensive plan before you. It's just asking for a zoning change from a Josephine County zone to a city zone. So this map shows what that broader area looks like. The blue line here is the City of Grants Pass urban growth boundary. The red lines are the city limits. And all of the area outside, the aerial photo here is outside the urban growth boundary. What's not shown on here is there's quite a bit of property here to the southwest, as well as to the northeast, that is urban reserve. And the urban reserve is a category that was adopted in 2014 that kind of identifies land that is more than 20 years out for urban development. So the criteria for making this decision is in the Development Code, section 4.033, and the project is classified as a minor amendment to the comprehensive plan. And this has to be processed as a quasi-judicial review, which the mayor read the requirements for the quasi-judicial review earlier. So here are the criteria that are in the code that have to be met before this can be approved. The use has to be consistent with the proposed zoning. The proposed zoning is R2. And the R2 zone does allow for single-family housing and also duplexes, both of which are possibilities for future development. The second one is the proposed zone is consistent with the comp plan designation. I already talked about that moderate density zone. Adequate urban services need to be there before it could be zoned to an urban service. The Public Works Department, the Oregon Department of Transportation, and the Public Safety Department all reviewed the zoning and found that it would be compliant and they could provide urban services. It's consistent with the Transportation System Plan. We received a letter from the Oregon Department of Transportation that stated that they did find that the application could be consistent on their end, and the Planning Commission and staff also found it to be consistent with ours. There's a collector classification on Leonard Road, and that collector classification allows up to 10,000 trips a day. That's how we classify those. This would not be expected to push Leonard Road over that limit. Natural features are conducive to the proposed zoning. As you'll hear from the applicant, there actually have been some identified wetlands on the property. The owner did hire a ecologist who went out to the property and did a study. And so that is an issue that was identified that may come up to some level during the subdivision review, which would have to come after this. But it was not found to be prohibitive to rezone the property. Consistent with overlay districts, there are none, and that the timing is appropriate with available services and needs for the zone. So the Planning Commission held their hearing on September 22nd, and the Commission determined that all of those criteria are met, and they do recommend approval to the City Council. There were some public comments that were received as a part of this public hearing process. One comment was from Leah Bruno and Curtis Bauer, who are neighbors to the west. They did voice concerns about the loss of open space, wildlife habitat, and increased densities. We also received a letter from James and Lana Lowe stating some concern with traffic impacts as a result of the future subdivision, and they specifically asked for a traffic light at the intersection of Redwood and Darnell Lane. There was another person that questioned the proposed dense zoning, but thought that it was in line with the comprehensive plan designation. And then we did get a comment from Oregon's Fair Housing Council stating that it looks good on their end. So this might be a good time just to remind you there is not a subdivision before you tonight. In any future subdivision of land or development, with the exception of a single-family house, would have to go through another process that has a whole nother set of reviews. So what this application is just asking for that change of zoning to a city zone. So the call to action is there, that the Urban Planning Commission recommends this council approve. You do have in your packets a possible motion should you decide to do that. But at this point, that ends staff's comments.
Thank you, Brad. Are there any questions for staff? Yeah. No, I'm sorry, it's the council who asked the questions. Valerie?
Hi, I'm Brad. I just basically want clarification, because when we went through the packet, they did show each of the properties with the maximum single-family housing and also the maximum of duplex. And I know that there's no subdivision going through, and that would be a whole nother discussion down the line. But that was part of the transportation impact analysis, am I correct? To show that with the maximum duplexes on that, they are below the capacity to have to make any kind of adjustment to the road. Am I correct?
Yes, you are. That
Okay.
is correct. There's a clause in the Oregon Department of Transportation's sort of a technical manual that says if it generates less than 1,000
Right.
new vehicle trips a day, then it was considered minor, and they would not mandate that next level of traffic study. So that, I think, was the reason why Sando, the traffic engineer, kind of calculated that out in order to determine whether it met that minor. They sort of looked at all single family or all duplex, and if you took all duplex, it did come close to 1,000. I think it was 900 something, but it's still underneath that. So.
Okay, thank you. And this is an example, if I'm correct, of a citizen or client-based application in their urban growth boundary on one of the three ways that they can we can develop the urban growth boundary. Am I correct?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Vanessa?
Thank you, Brad, for that presentation. Under the findings of fact section criteria, it does state that in order for recommended approval of the project as proposed, it must be consistent with sections 4 of the Grants Pass Development Code. Is that the only section that it has to be considered under? Is that an exclusive criteria?
It is. Yeah, for a zone map amendment, it's just subject to Article 4.033.
Thank you.
Brian?
Yeah, thank you, Brad. So in the packet, there was a schematic, I guess, of what they may propose to do with this site as far as number of dwellings and layout and such. And I know that's not part of what we're approving tonight, but I guess my question is, after we do this zone change, the property owner, what is the minimum number of dwellings per tax lot that this property owner could do?
The minimum number of dwellings per tax lot. So in the R2, you can do a primary dwelling unit, and you can do an accessory dwelling unit.
Okay, so if they so chose, they could just have a single family dwelling and a ADU on these tax lots?
Correct.
Okay. And then on that same schematic, I'm not sure what page it was on, but it did identify one, actually it looked like maybe two wetlands on those tax lots. And there was some language in here about, I guess one of them was more clear than the other one, and maybe this is a question that's more for the applicant, but just making sure that, those are being, protected and not, that DLCD is making sure that those are not being, I guess, built over.
Right, and in this case, it's actually the Department of State Lands, DSL, who is responsible for the review of all wetland delineations, and that would be an application that gets uploaded to DSL, and they would review and as a part of that process. So I apologize. I think Ryan could probably speak a little bit more to that, and maybe the applicant can give more information.
Okay, great. I just had one other quick question. On page 136 of the packet, there is a letter from a property owner that's adjacent to those properties, and it looks like there was some discussion about that property being lumped into this zone change, since it's basically the only property between the city zoning and these properties. And so it sounded like it made some sense to possibly include that in the zone change. And it looked like that there was maybe going to be some discussions around that, but I don't know if those occurred or if that's a part of this at all.
Yes, they occurred to the degree that we determined they would have to have a separate application. There really isn't a mechanism to just tack on to an active application. The public hearing notice, for example, for this application went out to everybody, and it didn't include that one. It only included these two parcels. So there really is not an opportunity to just add it on. There would have to be another separate process.
Great, thank you.
Any further questions? Vanessa?
I did want to receive clarification, again, on the findings of fact under criterion 7 for urban services available to the site and adequate for the intended use. Just on the very next page, it does indicate that both water and sewer will need to be extended to the site. Can you help clarify that?
Sure. So when we're doing a review of a future development, or a proposed development, we're looking at the adopted master plans. So the city has, in 2016 and 2017, the city adopted a sewer master plan, a water master plan, a stormwater master plan. And those master plans, when they were developed, they modeled what the future utilities would have to be. And they used the comprehensive plan as the basis for that modeling. So when staff is looking at that criteria, we're looking at, okay, even though they may not have literally water and sewer lines in the ground in front of the property, are they able to extend them, at a reasonable distance? And does the master plan allow for that level of development? So is the pipe that's planned, is it adequate size to be able to handle this amount of sewage, that amount of water demand? So that's what we looked at. So that basically is saying yeah, there is not currently services there in the ground, but it's reasonable that they could be extended, and the master plan supports it.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions at this time? All right, would the applicant please come forward and make their presentation?
Thank you, Brad. I'm Rick Riker, Grants Pass, an individual private land consultant. I'm representing Bruce Buckmaster, the owner. Rather than go through everything, I would just like to hit some high points. On criterion 1, this is consistent. The comprehensive plan is medium density, MR. The zoning request is R2, which complies with that. Criteria 2, the zoning district with the comprehensive plan, again, medium density R2, which is single family or duplex. Criterion 3, urban services. Vanessa, what you talked about, there is water, sewer, and storm drain in the vicinity, and the development of the site will include extension of that. The other thing that was mentioned, that the existing water and sewer plant is capable of handling this additional activity. Criterion 4, the master transportation plan. We had a traffic engineer do a traffic analysis, and that was submitted to ODOT, which they approved. And also, the city of Grants Pass has a traffic engineer, and he reviewed it and found it to be in compliance with the request. Under criterion 3, natural features, it's basically open grassy fields. Another thing under there, we had a wetlands consultant too do an on-site delineation, which means they go out and confirm the actual location of the wetland location. And in the concept plan, the original wetlands are done by aerial photos, and it was thought that there were 2 locations, but the wetland consultant found there was just 1 location, which is basically in the northwest corner, and that would be reflected in future applications. But the other idea too, those wetlands would be protected. Criterion 6, overlay district, there is none. Criterion 7, timing. We feel it's appropriate to move forward. Urban services are available and housing is a need. Another thing that's mentioned when you do a comp plan zone change is the state of Oregon has planning goals. Number 2 is land use planning, and this is listed in the urban growth boundary rezone map as the West Redwood District. Number 9 of the state goal, the economy of the state. This would provide home construction, consequential jobs, and housing. And number 10 is housing, and as we all know, we have a lack of housing in the community, and this will provide that as for professional and local people. At this time, that concludes my presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any additional questions.
Are there any questions? No? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else here who would like to speak in favor of this application? Okay. Well, as far as questions go, you can speak in favor or you can speak in opposition to it. You can ask your questions during your comments, but there's no obligation for anyone to respond. It would just be up to the council if they wanted to pursue that question. Are you speaking in support?
Yes, in support. My name is Bruce Buckmaster. I was 6 months old in 1948 when my family bought this property. South River Road was a dirt road then, and since then there's been tremendous change, and the need for housing is very important to this community, and this development that we're proposing will help satisfy that. And thank you for your time.
Thank you. Is there anyone else here who wanted to speak in support of the application? All right. Is there anyone who wanted to speak in opposition to the application? All right. Does the applicant have, We have a hand. Okay, please come forward and state your name.
Judy Ahrens, resident.
Pull
of
your
Josie-
mask up, please.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Judy Ahrens, resident of Josie County. I think I'm speaking in opposition. I just had a couple questions, and they might sound like I'm opposing it. But as we move into this urban area planning development, which has been, going on for many, many years, if I understand, and you could correct me, but amending this zoning map means that we're moving, from what I understand from the presentations, we're moving from the county into presently into the city environment here, if that's correct. Correct me if I'm incorrect. And if that be the case, I know people normally have concerns when we're moving from an area, location in the county, now being from going from urban to the city. And what people have concerns about, a lot that I have talked to, they're concerned about in the city, the taxation is sky high. A neighbor of mine just says she's paying just unbelievable city tax money now. And I live in people that live in the county pay less. So there's an exorbitant tax in the city versus that. Now, I'm not saying that's why you're doing it. You want to, get more money because it looks like that there's benefits to it. But when you do that, I know there is some kind of a financial burden, I think, on people that are now being considered in that urban development area where they're moving from the county to the city. And I could be wrong, but correct me, and that was my only comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further comments? Please come forward and tell us your name.
Excuse me, I have emphysema. My name is William Williams. I'm a resident of Grants Pass.
Can you please wear your mask, sir? Sorry.
Like I said, I have emphysema, hard time breathing.
It's a state law. Thank you.
A few questions which have not made clear to me at all. I understand it's residential. Residential requires city and county services to be brought in. What's not clear to me, who pays for the road improvements, the sewer, the water, and the power? Is that the developer or is that the city and county? Nobody knows, right? Secondly, obviously it's residential. There's residential properties around it with a certain amount of acreage per lot. I don't know if there's a minimum or not, but they appear to be a third to, maybe from a quarter to half acre from what I can see. We can't tell if this is going to be for less acreage or not. For all I know, it could be all condominiums with very little per person ratio. Third, this is zone R, as I understand it, by way of just county. There's a reason why people do things. I haven't found that out yet. Same lot, same idea, R to R1. I don't know, but I suspect that the property tax revenues from this project, if left not rezoned, will go to Josephine County. If it's zoned Grants Pass, the revenues would go to Grants Pass. Does anybody have an answer for any of these questions?
It's just your opportunity to speak. We don't have to answer. Sorry.
Well, it's not made clear. Therefore, I oppose it.
All right. Is there anyone else who wanted to speak tonight? All right. Does the applicant have any further comments?
I just would like to respond to the gentleman's one question about who pays for improvements. Whenever a subdivider comes in and proposes a project, one of the biggest challenges that they have is providing those improvements, extension of water, extension of sewer and water and roads. So that is not something that's put upon the taxpayer or upon other residents. Thank you.
Staff, do you have any further comments? No? All right. I'll just remind everybody that the decision tonight is based upon the criteria that are listed in the staff report. There are specific criteria that apply in land use hearings such as this, and it can be kind of confusing to the public, but if you wanted to see a list of what those criteria are, just please ask staff and they'll provide it for you. And with that, I will turn it over to the council for further discussion. DJ.
I read this application when it came across the site plan committee, and all the criteria is thoroughly struck and written. You did a good job, Rick. So I'd like to make a motion to adopt the ordinance amending the zoning map and have it read by title only, first reading.
Second from Valerie, thank you. Is there discussion on the motion? Valerie?
Yeah, I just would like to say why I think this is such an important thing, and I do understand the gentleman's concern. I will say 2014 is when this piece of the urban growth boundary was established, and I do know that you moved here after 2014, so this was established as an area of growth. We are truly hampered as a city in a housing crisis, and that is honestly, and I will give Rick the same kudos, we're kind of hampered now because in our transportation plan, we tried to take in all of the new zoning at one time, and it's not possible. We have to go through, according to ODOT, and do some special things to make sure that the impact from the transportation will be okay. And that's one of the things that this project does, is it went to ODOT, did the traffic analysis, realized that the impact on the road would be less than, and so this can move forward and be annexed in. And it is very important for our citizens and to build. So it's clear, objective. It's met every one of the criteria that needs to be met in order for us to move forward. So technically, we need to move it forward. So, like I said, it's just one of those things. You know, we live in an area where rural changes to urban. You happen to be lucky that you live in the in the state of Oregon, where there's stream land use rules that make it very tedious to get to this point. And because it is so tedious to get to this point, when we finally get to this point, I think it's really important that we move forward to solve the problem that we have with housing in our community. So that's why I will be voting yes.
Thank you. Is there further discussion? Brian?
Yeah. First, I want to say I am going to vote in favor, but I do have concerns that we currently don't have any minimum density requirements in the R2 zoning. So after we make this change on these lots, you know, for all the good intentions that the landowner may have, they could very well go ahead and put single-family homes on these, which isn't really going to do anything to help us solve the housing crisis. So I would just remind council that when the minimum density discussion does come up next month, to maybe take a look at the R2 zoning and including that, because right now that zoning is not included. Thank you.
Further discussion? All right, DJ, you made the motion to approve the ordinance that would amend the zoning map. How do you vote?
Yes.
Joel?
Yes.
Valerie?
Yes.
Brian?
Yes.
Rob?
Yes.
Kurt?
Yes.
And Vanessa?
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0. Julie, can you please read the ordinance?
An ordinance of the Council of the City of Grants Pass amending the zoning map for properties located at 3322 Leonard Road.
Valerie?
I'd like to move to adopt the ordinance amending the zoning map and have it read by title only, second reading.
Thank you. Is there a second? Vanessa, thank you. Valerie, how do you vote?
Yes.
Brian?
Yes.
Rob?
Yes.
Kurt?
Yes.
Vanessa?
Yes.
DJ?
Yes.
And Joel?
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0. Julie?
An ordinance of the Council of the City of Grants Pass amending the zoning map for properties located at 3322 Leonard Road.
Thank you. All right, next up on the agenda, we have a resolution that would designate the California black oak at 1235 Southwest 5th Street as a heritage tree. Hello, Tony.
It's time for Meredith to speak. She'll need to unmute herself by pressing *5.
Thank you. Go ahead, Tony.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council, for having me. It's very exciting to present another Heritage Tree nomination before you. And this one is going to be our first nomination for a private tree for that designation. And my name is Tony Meekum. I'm the urban forester for the city. Subject and summary: to review the recommendation of the Urban Tree Advisory Committee to designate the California black oak, scientific name Quercus cologii, at 1238 Southwest 5th Street as a heritage tree. This designation will recognize the significant community benefit of the tree due to its age, size, species, horticultural quality, and historical value. The relationship to council goals: maintain, operate, and expand our infrastructure to meet community needs by enhancing our community's tree canopy. Through the Grants Pass Municipal Code and Development Code, the city recognizes that trees are community resources that purify air, filter stormwater, reduce flooding, provide shade and wind protection, reduce street noise and glare, screen unsightly objects and scenes, provide a restful and healthy environment, enhance tourism, increase property value, support wildlife habitat, regulate surface and river temperatures, reduce erosion, and more. The purpose of the heritage tree section of the municipal code is to, quote, to recognize, foster, appreciation, and provide for protection of heritage trees. And this is found in Title 10 of the Grants Pass Municipal Code. City Council designated the first heritage trees of Grants Pass in April 2021. These trees are on public property. There are currently no heritage trees on private property. The photo on the right is from our Friday celebration with many members from almost every committee, advisory committee had representation, and we had the mayor and great constituent Arden McConnell unveil the first plaque for the first round of heritage trees. Trees on public and semi-public property, often called the public right-of-way, are regulated under Grants Pass Municipal Code Title 10. Apart from development regulations set in the Grants Pass Development Code, private property trees that are non-hazardous do not have city regulations on preservation, pruning, maintenance, or removal. The Heritage Trees chapter of the Municipal Code in 10.02 provides an opportunity for constituents to nominate a tree for protections and regulations like those that govern public and semi-public trees. The Heritage Tree Program is a way for property owners to honor the legacy of their land and for constituents to honor the legacy of public lands. There are some regulations, and I won't go through all of them, but these are kind of the highlights of what are applied to heritage trees. It's very similar to trees on public property and in the public right-of-way. Heritage trees must be kept free of certain prohibited activities as detailed in the Grants Pass Municipal Code. Some examples of these prohibited activities include filling or piling materials at or within the drip line, which can damage the root system, topping the tree, which is a practice that is no longer supported by the International Society of Arboriculture, pruning large branches without a tree permit, excavation in drip line without a tree permit, or removal without a tree permit. There's further information that can be found in the packet in the resolution background and then also in our municipal code. So a California black oak at 1238 Southwest 5th Street was nominated by the property owners Meredith and Roy Harris, and I believe that they are listening right now. They could only attend virtually. The map on the bottom left shows the tree with its expansive canopy, and the photo on the right I took last night, hopefully the last evening that it's not a heritage tree. It definitely shines very beautifully right now. The tree was given its significant tree status by the Urban Tree Advisory Committee and Mayor Holzinger in 2004. The property owners still have the significant tree designation on their back porch, and the Daily Courier did a weekend article front page and, quote, said, in 2004, the tree was added to the city's significant tree list, and the certificate hangs outside, proudly facing the tree, now faded from the sun that makes it through the canopy's oak, or the oak's canopy. The applicant, who's with us virtually, states in her application that the tree satisfies the requirements of heritage tree status. It satisfies that it's significant in age, size, species, horticultural quality, and historical value. The Urban Tree Advisory Committee agreed and recommended designation at their October 11th meeting. The staff report I prepared is in your packet, and I agree with the applicant's narrative and the Urban Tree Advisory Committee's recommendation. That should start at page 151 of your packet. Some of the notable qualities of this tree, I had the pleasure of looking at the tree with a former chair of the Urban Tree Advisory Committee many years ago. He's a retired Bureau of Land Management forest pathologist. and quite an expert in our local native trees. And he confidently, with his expert opinion, felt that this tree was over 250 years old. This chart on the bottom left, I won't bore you in too much details, but I checked the literature and it checks out. A tree that's on average, a California black oak through the U.S. Forest Service of about 200 years would have a crown diameter on average of 52 feet, and this one has a 95-foot wide canopy, almost double that. The species is native to Grants Pass. Its native range goes from Southern California through most of California, which is where its common name comes from, but also up into Oregon. And Josephine County is pretty unique. This tree is native to Southwest Oregon, and Josephine County certainly has quite a few. So the cost implication, really it's approximately $300 for the heritage tree plaque and installation. Here's some copies or photos of some plaques that have been furnished for other trees. The one on the left was for Martin Parks trees, and then there is a different option that's going to be put up next to our Hiroshima peace tree, which is a ginkgo tree at the water restoration plant. The call to action date is at council's discretion, and the call to action is at your discretion. Alternatives: move to approve the resolution designating the California black oak at 1238 Southwest 5th Street as a heritage tree, deny the proposed heritage tree designation, or move to workshop. And we do have the chair of the Urban Tree Advisory Committee here, Doug Tripp, because this was a motion from his committee, and also the applicant, Meredith and Roy Harris, are on the phone.
Thank you, Tony. Does anybody have any questions before we have the committee or the applicant speak? Nope. All right. Doug, did you want to say anything? Or are you just here to represent? Don't want to put you on the spot.
I'm here to answer any questions that the council might have, but also I will take the opportunity to just say that I've had some personal experiences with this tree, and I've had the opportunity to climb around it and climb in it a little bit, and it's an amazing tree, and I'm not surprised that it's being nominated for the Heritage Tree Program. So really excited to see how things turn out tonight.
Passes the climb test, huh? Any questions? Valerie?
Yes, this is Valerie. Thank you, Meredith. I know Meredith, she's a wonderful woman. What a beautiful tree. And my question is, can it be seen from anywhere? I know it's on private property, which I respect and totally want to respect that, but it looks like it's right along the river as well. So as we're floating by, it'd be nice to know if there was something on it to indicate that it was a heritage tree, so you could float by and be in awe of it from that perspective. Food for thought.
That is a really neat idea.
Meredith, did you want to say anything? And if you're muted, you may need to push *5 to unmute yourself.
It looks like she's still on, and I did text message her also, but it doesn't seem like she's making the connection.
Okay. All right. Joel.
Doug, I just had one more question for you, and it's an easy one. On the tree committee, was this a unanimous recommendation?
Yes, it was.
All right. Any further questions? No? Okay. Thank you, Doug. Was there anyone from the public who wanted to speak on this? All right. Please come forward and tell us your name at the mic, and you need to wear your mask while you're...
Yes.
Thank you. Sorry.
Just a brief question.
Nope, you got to come forward to the mic, please.
Just a brief question. They mentioned that the tree is 240 or 50 years old. My simple question is, what is the anticipated lifespan of this tree?
Thank you. All right, is there anyone further who wanted to speak?
Do I get an answer to the question? Yeah.
Well, the way that this works, let me just explain it. This is the council's meeting. We do allow public comment, and if the council wants to ask that question and follow up, they are welcome to, but there's no obligation. We don't take questions from the public. So, sorry, but that's the rules. Hang on, Doug. All right, is there anyone from the public who wanted to speak on this issue? All right, I think I'm going to turn it over to council for discussion. Joel?
Well, I just out of courtesy, I would ask Doug, what's the potential age? What is the average age of these trees left?
Yeah, I would say most common studies, mostly done with the Forest Service, would say that the average lifespan of like a California black oak would be up to 500 years.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
For discussion, given in the unanimous decision, the collaboration of the landowner, unless somebody else had some other comments, I was going to go ahead and make a motion, but I want to respect other people if they had any comments. Okay. I move to approve the resolution designating the California black oak on 5th Street as a heritage tree.
Thank you, Joel. Valerie with the second. Did you have any further discussion on that, Joel?
Not at this time.
Okay. Is there any further discussion on the motion? Nope. All right. Joel, you made the motion to add it to the list. How do you vote?
Yes.
Valerie?
Yes.
Brian?
Yes.
Rob?
Yes.
Rick?
Yes.
Kurt?
Yes.
Vanessa?
I will vote yes, but Joel, I am disappointed you didn't try to take a stab at the official name of that tree.
Yes.
Did you? Thank you. All right, motion carries 8-0. And thank you to the Harris family for participating out there in the heritage tree list. I stopped by and saw your tree last week, and it's a lovely oak. And thanks for the committee for your work on this as well. All right, next up, we're going to consider a resolution that would identify the location, the mystery location of a future renovated caveman pool.
My name is Meredith Harris.
Is now exiting.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council, Brad Clark, Community Development. Just a short presentation for you here on the resolution that's before you. This is a follow-up to a workshop that you had recently discussing a recommendation from the Parks Advisory Committee about Caveman Pool. So the resolution formally identifies the existing location of Caveman Pool at 801 Northeast 9th Street as the location, regardless of the scope and improvements of a future renovated facility. And the relationship to your council goals is to support, to maintain, operate, and expand our infrastructure to meet community needs by ensuring that our public park infrastructure is adequate to serve the community now and into the future. So the council did ask back in May that the committee be formed to review this topic and to make a recommendation to the council about a potential future location of a pool. And that team is listed there. Most of those members are part of the Parks Advisory Committee, other than the bottom four, Nikki Kolb, Scott Lindbergh, Beth Dwyer, and Joyce Loomis, who were invited citizens to participate just for this Caveman Pool review team. So they met 4 times during the summer of 2021, with their last meeting being September 9th. And after those meetings were completed, where Councilor King kind of helped to facilitate some of those discussions, they found it to be essential to our community to have a place to swim, to exercise, to compete, to recreate, and to cool off on hot days. So there were several other city parks that were considered for an alternative location, both on the north side of the river and the south side of the river. But several factors made those other locations not really rise up to a priority, and those are listed there. Some of them are too small, such as Lawn Ridge. Some of them had other competing uses already in the park that would make adding a new public swimming pool a challenge. The 100-year floodplain impacts Riverside Park, for example, homeless camping, and then there's several that have some limited parking opportunities. So they concluded that replacing the existing pool in its current location was the most efficient and cost-effective approach. There is infrastructure already in place there on 9th Street. It's fairly central if you look at the whole of the city to be able to access it, being really connected to the Grants Pass High School property there, and the support that is there both with the swim team at the school, but also the opportunity in the future to potentially add some parking on the school property that might help to relieve some of the congestion that happens now during the summertime there at the pool. So during their deliberations, they talked about providing a facility that would accommodate current activities with the goal to make additional improvements. And they did prioritize those 9 other amenities that the committee felt were important. This is really not terribly relevant to your resolution tonight, but I did want to put it in there just so you can see that. There is not a cost implication with this resolution because you're essentially just affirming that the current location is where the pool expansion and or other infrastructure improvements would be located. But clearly, more study, more analysis is needed should the council decide that we're going to proceed with some upgrades. So the call to action is at your discretion, and you can adopt the resolution, adjust it, or decide not to adopt it.
Thank you, Brad. Are there any questions? Joel, then Brian.
Brad, would it be fair to say with the committee, they had a lot of different opinions going in terms of location, and they had a fairly robust discussion of the advantages and disadvantages of each, with everyone having a say, and they came out all supporting the existing location after they worked through their differences?
I definitely think that's a fair characterization.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Brian.
Yep, thanks, Brad. I know the last time we talked about this, I think where we left it was we were probably going to be needing to find some sort of outside consultant or someone to help us with the design and to keep moving this project forward. And so I guess my question is do we have any sort of rough timeline as far as at least when we're going to be able to bring somebody in to help us start doing that?
No, other than the fact I can tell you we've started to reach out to identify a handful of consultants who we think might be qualified to, receive a request for proposal so that we can get that master list together. There's been a couple of conversations with the city of Ashland who did make a public pool improvement recently, or their park district, not necessarily the city of Ashland, it's actually their park district. So we are, moving towards that. Once we get a park superintendent hired, which will hopefully be soon, this will certainly be a high priority for that person.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions? Joel?
Well, I guess we need to move on to discussion.
Public comment?
Public comment, okay.
All right.
That's a good thing.
Is there anyone from the public who wanted to speak on this issue? I guess not. Joel, did you want to open the discussion?
Well, I don't want to cut discussion short, but if everybody's okay, I'll go ahead and make the motion. We okay? Brian, you okay with that? Okay. I move to approve the resolution identifying the location of the future renovated caveman pool facility and located at its present location at 801 Northeast 9th Street.
Thank you. Valerie at the second. Discussion on the motion? Valerie.
My only discussion point would be what I brought up earlier, that I would like to see it at a workshop as soon as possible so that we can get the wheels turning, because we also need to have the discussion as to how to pay for it, and if it's urban renewal dollars, we will need to annex it into the urban renewal district, and I know that it may take some time. So Thank you.
Brian?
Yeah, I'm just really glad to see us finally moving this forward and getting things moving on this. I know it's going to take probably a couple years to actually get this project done, but I'm glad we're getting it started. And I'm glad that next Monday we actually have urban renewal on our agenda, so we can talk about that piece then, Valerie.
Great.
Further discussion? All right, Joel, you made the motion to approve this location. How do you vote?
Yes.
Valerie?
Yes.
Brian?
Yes.
Rob?
Yes.
Rick?
Yes.
Kurt?
Yes.
Vanessa?
Yes.
DJ?
Yes.
All right, motion carries 8-0. Thanks to the Parks Committee and the Pool Task Force for your work on this, and Joel was our council liaison, so he was a part of that as well. Sounds like they had a good discussion, and now we will focus on that location as a site for renovating or expanding a new pool. All right, next up, we are considering a resolution that would approve a social services grant agreement with the All Care Community Foundation for the development of an urban campground. Mark, are you our presenter? While Mark's setting up, council, you have a stack of paperwork on your table tonight about this if you haven't found it yet.
Okay, good evening, Mayor and Council. So subject in summary is before you in the packet is an agreement for funding the purchase of property for an urban campground. This relates to the council goal of facilitating sustainable, manageable growth, and the development of an urban campground is an action item under an objective that supports that council goal. So council has expressed a desire to provide funding to the All Care Community Foundation for the acquisition of real property for an urban campground. The funding source would be a portion of the city's American Rescue Plan Act funds in the amount of $1.2 million. So part of the reason that I've proposed this be set up this way is that expenditure of the federal funds is subject to federal law, a federal administrative law called the Uniform Guidance. And that requires, among other things, that costs of expenditures be reasonable. Then it goes on to give various indicia of reasonableness, and one of which is evaluation of market prices for comparable goods or services for the geographic area. So I'll come back to that comment in a little bit, but it'll be apparent why I've mentioned that aspect. So I prepared a social services grant agreement that assists the city in complying with the Uniform Guidance. It provides, the city will provide up to $1.2 million to All Care to acquire property for an urban campground. It provides further that in order to receive the purchase money, All Care must provide the city with a purchase agreement so the city can evaluate the purchase agreement and determine if it's in the best interest of the city and whether that expenditure would comply with the Uniform Guidance. So then, if the city approves the purchase, including the price and other factors, the city would then deposit the purchase money into escrow, and at closing, All Care would then record a restrictive covenant on the subject property. The restrictive covenant would provide that All Care shall be required to operate the property as an urban campground. And I thought a little bit about defining what an urban campground is, and I didn't really find a good definition, and I think that it would be probably a difficult task. However, after submitting this into the packet, I decided that it would probably be worthwhile to consider amending the agreement slightly to say an urban campground may consist of, but is not limited to, tent camping, tiny houses, pallet shelter, housing, and RV, and car camping. That's, of course, subject to council discretion, but I think I've covered most of what I would envision the housing options would be at an urban campground. And it also specifies the city is not committed to funding any ongoing operational costs. And then the city shall have the option to purchase the property back for $1, but not earlier than a year after all care's acquisition. So that option would be unilateral and discretionary on the city's part, but requires the city to provide 120 days notice. So the covenant runs with the land, meaning any future owners of the property are also subject to it. And just a little more explanation as to why that's put in there. One, it's for the obvious. If the city is, intending, is dedicating a significant amount of funds for a certain purpose, and you want to have assurances it's going to be operated for that purpose. The other reason is due to factors that I think we're aware of, but I'm not going to go into here due to attorney-client privilege issues. The city is, in my view, kind of essentially somewhat of a proxy owner here. And so this keeps the city's options open on the property and gives the city the opportunity to buy it back if it doesn't have its desired effect. If it needs a property for another purchase, needs the money that the property is worth, unintended consequences, changed circumstances, who knows? So it just protects the public money from being irrevocably committed to something. So as far as the practical matters, the mechanics of it would work as follows. Council would approve the grant agreement by resolution, and the grant agreement would then be executed. All Care would then present a specific property acquisition, and then pursuant to the approved resolution, council could simply just make a motion to fund an acquisition pursuant to that grant agreement. So it just so happens there is a specific property in mind. I got a sale agreement this afternoon, so that's on the dais. Also on the dais is a realtor's opinion of value, which is meant to at least present a modicum of compliance with the uniform guidance. So that realtor says that that's a reasonable price for this property. I believe he's an experienced realtor familiar with the Grants Pass market. And then, so property details, it's 3 3/4 acres located at 1750 Southeast N Street. The assessed price, assessed value, assessed RMV, according to the county assessor's office, is about $220,000. The purchase price is $1 million. So here's an aerial view of the subject property. I'm going to zoom in, get a little bit closer. So it's zoned business park. It's bounded to the north by railroad tracks and railroad right-of-way. To the east of the property is county maintenance yard, I believe. To the west of the property, we've got Umpqua, Dairy, you got Noveski, and then across N Street is a residential development with a significant number of townhomes. So this is, I think the All Care folks can, may want to explain this a little bit, but the property acquisition is $1 million, and these are essentially what I would call startup infrastructure costs that would be covered by, at least in large part, by $1.2 million. As you can see, it comes up a little bit above $1.2 million. It's $1,256,500. Call to action, council discretion, but of course we have a seller waiting to hear back on this property. It is certainly contingent upon city agreeing to fund it. And sign the agreement as is, postpone the action, amend the agreement. The choice is purely council's. And below that, we just listed the source of funds and how that would affect the remaining ARPA funds. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Mark. Council, do you have questions? Rick?
Thank you, Mark. Can you go back to the slide with the assessed value? So assessed value, does that come from the assessor's office, or where does that?
Yeah.
So that's what they are showing on their records for the value?
Yes.
Have we considered doing a formal assessment to current market conditions?
Like obtaining an appraisal?
Yes.
We have not. I don't know if the All Care folks have or not.
Any other questions? DJ?
Digging into the sales agreement a little bit, and I understand due diligence, but there are a couple questions that I had about the seller's disclosures. Starts on page 13, if anybody wants to get in there. Of the sales agreement. If you go to page 13, it starts the seller's property disclosure, and my questions start on the second page.
Is that the page that has the handwritten property? I guess they all have it at the top.
Yeah, at the top, you'll notice the property address at the very top in bold, seller's property disclosure statement on the second page, line 51. Any right-of-way easement licenses, access limitations, or claims that may affect your interest in the property, it's checked as unknown. Have we looked into that? Or has All Care looked into that?
I have not seen a title report on the property. That's typically, that would be issued after you're in contract and is submitted to escrow.
Sure. 54, government studies, designation, zoning overlay surveys, or notices that would affect the property that's marked no or unknown. We looked
They
into
probably
that.
meant to mark unknown.
Okay. 61, subject to a special tax assessment, tax treatment that may result in levy of additional taxes if the property is sold. That's marked unknown. Do we know anything about that?
No, and I'll tell you, when I represent sellers of property, I typically mark unknown to all but the most absolutely 100% knowable questions. I'm frankly not bothered by an answer of unknown.
Yeah. 88, property connected to public or community sewage marked non-applicable. Is that presuming there is no sewer connected to the property?
Yeah, it's undeveloped property.
And presumably there's a sewer main going through M Street. Yeah.
Certainly.
Okay, we got 181, problems with settling soil, standing water, or drainage unknown. 83, property contained fill, also unknown.
Yeah, and I don't know, I mean, this is entirely up to council. I don't know if you want to handle the grant agreement. I mean, the grant agreement is the main thing, right? It's at stage for all of this. I don't know if you want to work your way through the grant agreement and then consider the property separately, and I don't know if you want to consider the property tonight. If you consider it tonight and bless this property tonight, then it's done deal on this property.
Sure. Yeah, these are just inquiries about the sales agreement as we only just received today, demonstrating there's some diligence to be done on the property. And I'm unsure of the presumption as well of what the momentum this evening is, whether it is just the covenant and agreement to allocate funds or also to the sales agreement, given that the sales agreement showed up on our dais today. So demonstrating concerns about the sales agreement, however menial or otherwise handled in diligence, I wanted to bring that up. That's my first question.
Do you have an answer regarding the purchase of the property?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Well, I guess as far as what we're handling tonight, we're not purchasing this property. So our discussion is over whether or not to provide a social services grant to All Care, not over the property, would be my answer.
So it's two-step thing. I mean, there's a resolution in the packet, and that's been noticed and whatnot. Pursuant to, if you approve a resolution tonight, council would have the ability then to, as a result of the very recently approved resolution, then make a motion to direct us to deposit the funds in escrow for All Care to consummate this purchase. Now, All Care does, I believe, have like a 60-day due diligence period or something like that, or it's just closing would be 60 days, within 60 days of council approval, I believe. I mean, I haven't had a lot of time to review it.
Joel?
it looks like it's a fairly large piece of property. What is the capacity? If it was used as an urban campground, what is the capacity of number of units? And what kind of units? Don't know.
Yeah, so Rogue Retreat has put a cap limit on 75 sites. So that's the capacity they can handle with 2 staff, 24 hours a day. And that's the budget, the operating budget they've presented.
My question, does that include car parking and?
That can include car parking, but that's a different, we have not got a budget created for creating the asphalt area for car parking.
Okay.
So that car parking concept is not in the capital budget.
Okay, so currently,
But
there's
it
75
could,
units.
but that 75
sites.
sites is the number of sites they can handle with 2 people, 24 hours a day.
Okay.
And that is an assumption of potentially 2 people per site.
Okay.
So possibly 140 people on the ground, 24 hours a day.
Okay, thank you.
That's the capacity.
Additional questions? Brian?
Yeah, Mark, I have a question regarding the way the agreement is structured with regards to the city retaining the right to purchase the property back for $1. I'm just wondering how that works with the requirements of the ARPA money, because I know the ARPA money has to be spent by a certain date. So if the city was going to be essentially receiving back something of value that was the ARPA money was spent on after that date, do we have any information about how that would play out?
No, I really don't. We would solve the first part of that problem, and that's expending the money by a certain date. And eventually, you know, if we then 1 year later bought it back, I don't know if that would be a violation at that point or not. Certainly, at some point in the future, you know, that money would have been vested and would have been spent, I suppose, for a long enough duration that we're out of the woods and we could buy it back. But there's a lot that's speculative and new and unknown about ARPA restrictions, and so I gathered, what in the world? Gathered the information I could. So I realized that contingency's a bit of incomplete information, but that's the best I can give to you right now.
Okay, thanks.
Joel, then DJ?
I actually had 3 quick questions. The experience down in Medford, do you anticipate full capacity? I would assume you anticipate full capacity of those 140 sites or 75 sites?
I would think that, but I'm not the person to ask. I mean, it would be I don't know who would answer that appropriately, so I couldn't tell you.
Okay.
I assume they would be filled up, but.
Yeah, so we don't know. Okay, so then, I've heard different estimates of the success rate down in Medford in terms of helping people make even better choices so that they can lift themselves out of that. Do you know what that success rate has been? I mean, you folks have done a good job. The nonprofits here are very, very capable.
40%, apparently,
40%?
success rate, moving people out and on to other places.
So you'd have 40%, okay. Which is a good, you know, that's a good figure for this type of work. I understand that. Okay, thank you.
DJ?
So we have a ARPA survey out for the constituents to respond and give us input on how those monies should be allocated. When can we expect the findings of that survey?
November.
22nd, I think, is when we're reporting to you.
November 22nd?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Go ahead, Joel.
I'm sorry, I forgot one question. So typically, in your experience, have these been funded by municipal governments, city governments, or have they been funded through other means?
I'd have to defer to Matt. I believe down in Medford that the land has been funded as a lease by Medford, I think. Is that correct, Matt?
Yes, the city handles the lease negotiation for us down there, and then we work
Matt, could you just come forward, please? Because we have to talk into the mic in order for it to make it into the recording,
Yeah,
and some
yeah.
people are hard of hearing as well.
Yeah, I can't hear anyway, so I appreciate you coming up.
My name is Matt Borderstrass. I'm the Development Director at Rogue Retreat. Yes, so the city was heavily involved in helping us secure the land and negotiate the lease for the property, as well as helping pay for the property taxes of the
Oh,
site.
so do you lease it from a private property then?
Yes, so it is a private property owner.
And so there are city funds used in that?
There are some city funds, so the city actually helped the property owner as part of the lease agreement pay their property taxes for the year, as well as secure the terms
Okay,
of the lease.
so the city pays the property taxes, and
They did.
that's the extent of their participation?
That's the big part of it, is they help
Okay,
secure the site and
okay.
pay for that.
I believe they
Okay, thank
also
you.
cleared the land in Medford. Is that accurate?
Say that again?
That the city of Medford helped clear the land when it initially became the campground?
Yes, there was abatement with the, like weeds and stuff like that that needed to be cleaned up, and that was also part of the city's agreement, was they sent staff in to help clear it, basically.
Okay, so they were definitely a partner in the project. Valerie?
Okay, my question is about the operating expenses. It says in here that the operating expenses come from, not from the city, so I just want to know where the operating expenses are planning to be coming from for this operation.
So it's going to be a mixture of all care billing funds. So a big part of our projected budget for the urban campground is being able to primarily serve all care clients at the urban campground. And we have a billing arrangement with All Care to where we can bill for case management and peer support services. And so that will be leveraged into the urban campground, as well as also reaching out to leverage in Measure 110 funds. We currently have the similar funds over in Medford, and we would be doing the same thing here. And then also we are projecting out about $150,000 in support from UCAN to be able to help with ongoing operations.
Okay,
and
the
then I am
measure-
projecting to hope that I can get about $25,000 of CDBG funds from the city of Grants Pass.
Okay, thank you. And so my question is, Measure 110, meaning the mental health and substance abuse money
Yes.
coming down from the state, am I correct?
Correct. There's
Okay.
a big portion of that is for housing and shelter.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
DJ?
I am compelled to gauge your preparedness for taking on this project. Are those fund secured agreements in place to be able to move forward with an urban campground?
I'm sorry, I didn't.
So the All Care contract is currently under negotiation. We're currently redoing our terms with All Care, and then the UCAN contract has been basically agreed upon, but not formally by UCAN so far. So those are the two funds that I would be confident are secured. The rest we're projecting that we'll be able to leverage in.
So you're working on poising yourself to be prepared to create an urban campground, but you're not quite there yet?
So we have probably about 50% of the projected income
Sure.
we're confident is secured.
Okay.
The rest, I'm 90% confident that those are the sources that I'll be leveraging in.
Sure, thank you.
Going back, Jed Keller, All Care Foundation. Also, I was in charge of the fundraising for Foundry Village. As we got involved in this project, I did a survey of what would be available to support us in purchasing the land for an urban campground, and found basically no available resources outside of getting help from the city of Grants Pass. So going back to the question earlier of where the money came from.
Rob, then Rick, then Brian?
Yeah, I have a question for Mark. On the restricted covenant, I'm not sure if I understand. Like on the social services agreement that we did a while ago, I guess different facilities would have several years to prove their worth or to operate. And this, the way you've written it up, essentially for any reason whatsoever, unilateral and at the city's discretion, the city can essentially pull the plug on this in 120 days. And I'm just wondering how you came up with that. It seems as though if you've got startup costs and you've got infrastructure that has to be put in, and you've got, you expect All Care and Rogue Retreat to put their heart and soul into this, it would seem as though 120-day for any possible reason to tell them to vacate the property just seems very extreme to me, and I was just wondering how you chose that.
Well, the city's my client, and I'm drafting an agreement that's favorable to my client. If the city council wants something less favorable to the city, then it's within the city's discretion to change that.
Rick?
Mark, I also have a question. You indicated, as Rob said, in the future, if the city so determines they can buy the property back for $1, but do we have any other safeguards like first right of refusal if they want to sell the property, or how do we know what
Well,
activities
buying it
going-
back for $1 is a heck of a lot better safeguard than right of first refusal, because no one else, no matter who the property owner is, they're never going to willingly sell it for anyone for $1. It would be market price. So right of first refusal would just allow us to match market price.
Okay, so that contract locks the current owner into that.
This covenant runs with the land, and so if for some reason All Care transferred it or sold it to another nonprofit, the dollar buyback would still be in play for a future owner.
Okay, thank you.
Brian, then Valerie.
Yeah, this question's for Matt regarding, I just wanted to follow up on the funding question. I know you sound very confident in those funding sources, but let's say worst case scenario, some of those funding sources didn't come through. Would that set the stage for the urban campground to not be able to operate, or would it be able to operate at some sort of reduced capacity if all of those funding sources didn't come through?
Yes, so if all the funding sources did not come through, then we would change our operational plan to be able to lower the amount of people that we'd be serving. That way we could be able to continue to operate it.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Valerie?
Yeah, my question goes back to what Rob had brought up, because that was kind of an interesting point, because we did just recently go through the special, whatever it's called, I can't remember, the special district, or whatever, special rules for putting a shelter in. And I'm trying to remember what the wording was on that. I knew that there was, we had the right to shut her down if it wasn't operating. I don't know whether that was after a year or after 4 years, or I don't know if anybody can refresh myself on what that was. Special use permit. When we did the special use permit for transient, we changed transient social services agreement. We changed it, and one of the things that we did change is that special use permit, so that the city, if it wasn't working, could actually go in and shut her down. And so I'm just kind of trying to say that in some ways it kind of seems natural to kind of hone the two together, like Rob was saying. And so I've been just trying to refresh exactly what it was that we drafted at that time. If you can. Do you know, Brad?
Yeah, Council, you're correct. That special use permit clause that is in the new ordinance does give the city manager, the authority to revoke that permit, but that's only after there have been some kind of investigation by police, etc., some kind of reporting documentation where there's been a complaint, or not a complaint, but that has been done and documented, and then that could be revoked. In that case, that's an actual permit that is issued. So that's how we can do that. I'm not sure I'm getting to the crux of your question, though.
I guess I was just trying to say that we have something in the special use permit for the means by if it's not working to be able to revoke a permit. And as Rob said, if you're going to put and invest in buildings and infrastructure, whatever, on that piece of property, it seems natural to me that there has to be something rather. I would want a certain protection rather than just saying all of a sudden somebody decided we're going to push, we're going to pull it out. That there needed to be something like a permit that was revoked, or something that had a little bit more meat in it. And so that's what I was questioning, whether that was a possibility to add that to it, that it went along with that special use permit.
It's possible to add anything to it. I mean, the range of options here are do something like this, like what I've put on the table, and you can just view that as a starting point for discussion. Or the other end of the spectrum, we can just hand over a bag of money and say, please do an urban campground, and I really don't have much doubt that that's what they would do. But as an attorney, you put sideboards on things and you put restrictions on property, and that's why I'm proposing this. So again, it's a starting point. You want to make it more generous, or you want to make it more difficult for the city in the future to change its mind about that property, then that's council's discretion. You can do whatever you want.
Can I address that point just slightly? Valerie, the special use permit, we, an urban campground, have to apply for that as well. So those rules apply to us as well. So there's sort of a double way in which the city can take this land back, what Mark is suggesting, and then the special use permit can be revoked as well.
Joel?
Thought I heard something, but I don't think it was correct. So I just want to confirm that. For people that are using the campground, there'll be some that are all care, Medicaid people. I assume that it's going to be open to the entire public and not just one insurance company?
Yes, no, it'll definitely be open to the entire public, but we're anticipating that a lot of the majority would be qualified for all care. And
so if
probably
your
have Medicaid.
competitors, they have a competitor insurance, they would be as welcome as all care?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Rob, then Rick.
So, Mark, I appreciate you, looking out for the best interest of the city and your client, and that's what you are paid to do. So, I would, however, like to see this covenant, we'll say, not necessarily less restrictive, but more in line with the conditions of the special use permit. And if whoever's running the campground was to violate the conditions of the special use permit, obviously there's a remedy for that, and there's a time frame for that. I don't necessarily see that we need a tighter time frame than what we already have in our special use permit. I just don't see it being particularly fair to All Care or to Rogue Retreat. And if we were to go ahead with this, I want to see it succeed. And I don't want to see a knee-jerk reaction from either future counselors or future staff or whoever to pull the plug on this. I'd like to see it succeed if we're going to move forward with it, and having essentially a unilateral discretionary for no reason at all, being able to buy it back for $1, and there's no, All Care has no way to correct whatever the infractions may be, which is the way it reads now. I just don't see that as being a fair deal for them. And as an extension, it's not really a good deal for us as a council if we do want to see it succeed. So I'd actually like to see this covenant be, we'll say, less restrictive and more in line with our special use permit, which would give them, whoever's running the campground, a chance to remedy any problems, to look at them, remedy them, work with police or work with whoever if a problem were to come up. Because again, if we are going to move forward with it, I want to be fair to all parties and I want to see it succeed.
All right, let's stick to questions for right now, and then we'll do public comment, and then we'll start deliberation. Rick, do you have a question? Okay, go ahead.
So Mark, we received a memo specifically, well, this memo was permitting on warming center, but may apply also to campgrounds as well, referencing House Bill 2006A, and there may be another House bill that may not require, that permits.
Yeah, that's correct. My reading of that law, which I think sunsets in, I want to say July of 2022, but as of right now, approval of an urban campground is not a land use decision. So ordinarily it would be, so it would require public notice, public hearing, notice to neighbors and whatnot, and it's not that right now. So you can only apply building code to any elements of an urban campground. You cannot, it's not a conditional use permit, it's not any kind of land use process.
So that would streamline the whole process without having to go through the permits. Is that correct?
Without having to go through land use permits, correct. To the extent building permits are implicated, then, that process would still be required, but that's ministerial. That doesn't come before council.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions? DJ, then Joel.
So, yeah, just to follow up for you, Mark. I think given that the topic of the property and allocation of funds are inextricably linked, ARPA regulations as far as uniform guidance goes, I did listen to you when you were talking about that evaluation of market price. Is that going to meet the burden proof of uniform guidance for ARPA funding paying a asking price that's 5 times more than the RMV?
Well, when you juxtapose the RMV and the asking price, it looks bad. I think we can all admit that. But I've also been around the block enough that I know there's oftentimes a pretty significant discrepancy between the RMV and the true real market value. So RMV stands for real market value, and it's a bit of a misnomer at times, and it probably is in this case. All we have to go on is a local realtor who says, yeah, I think that's a fair price. Is that enough to withstand scrutiny if there were an audit? I don't know. I've never been through an audit due to the uniform guidance. I think we've at least made a prima facie case that it's a reasonable price. I didn't see anything in the regulations that says you have to get an appraisal.
Yeah, that answers my question. Thank you.
Joel?
So this is actually for staff and for my fellow council people. I have the utmost respect for you three and your organizations you represent, and you do a fine job. You have a lot of integrity, and you operate in a quality manner. So these questions are not aimed at you at all. Since this campground would be funded by city dollars that came to the city from the federal government, which is kind of unusual, I think it's the only one that I've heard of in Southwest Oregon that would be funded that way. There's always opportunity costs. So what else could that $1.2 million be used for? Not on the part of the nonprofits, so you may want to ask yourself that question as well, but on the part of the city. So it's good that we show compassion. We need to show compassion for people that don't have a home. We also need to show compassion to the 35,000 people that have a lower quality of standard of living because of what's happening to their parks. Those are both facts. We also have some capital investments. We also have a water treatment plant. And so I can't remember his name. He was on the budget committee, but if he was up here, he would ask this question. So Gordon. So have we thoroughly examined the opportunity costs of this $1.2 million in terms of the compassion that we need to have to those people that are homeless, to those people that are having a lower standard of living, those 35,000 people, or to other projects in the city that will be foregone because that money will be spent here? And I don't know if I can openly answer that question.
I don't know that we can answer that question. I think that, council directed us to look at an expenditure of the funds in this way, and so our attention has been directed to this kind of an expenditure. So we've not evaluated alternative places to spend that money.
Well, I appreciate that. I knew the answer.
Brian?
Yeah, I just have a question about the cost breakdown for the project. In the presentation, all of the line items add up to $1.256 million. And so I understand that there are going to be costs in addition to that number. So I don't know if you guys have an idea of what those costs will be. As you said, these numbers don't include the infrastructure for any sort of car camping operations. So, I know you probably don't have those numbers dialed in yet, but is there any sort of, as this is, assuming this goes through and we do this, when it's all built out and we have the car camping and everything that the fully functioning operation would have, do you have any sort of estimate as far as additional capital costs in addition to what we're seeing on this sheet?
I have not, I have a meeting tomorrow with a excavator paver on site to talk about paving for car camping tomorrow, so I don't know when I'll get a price back from them so that we can then create some sort of a budget for paving for car camping. So that's to address that point. So no idea until I get some numbers and we can extrapolate that out. And then the second part of the capital budget, which I presented to Aaron, and I think Mark might have got a copy of it. We talked about a phase 2, which would be permanent showers, permanent bathrooms, those types of things. And we line item those out as for costs for more permanent infrastructure. But that is, we'll have to raise funds for those to get that done. And I think, was that your question?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, there are concepts that we develop: permanent structures, permanent bathrooms, permanent showers, permanent community room, permanent offices for case management. But that we'll have to raise the money for that and get grants to get that stuff built.
Okay. Yeah, that was the second part, is asking about the funding sources, so that's to be determined.
Yeah, to be determined. Until we're further along in the process, there's no reason to try to change this down grants to build a permanent bathroom until we know we got land and we've gotten that far.
Very good, thanks.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Valerie?
I guess this is a question, and it kind of goes back, and this is my question. So you mentioned that under the 2006 law that technically it wouldn't have to go through the land use part, correct? This could be an automatic, other than building permits that they would have to do if they build any buildings on the site. So if that were the case, then would we need to change the restrictive covenant, or would the restrictive covenant that you have here, which basically, as Doug discussed with us, that if they have to go through the planning process, they have to get a special use permit. So they pretty much, the special use permit is embedded in this, because they have to, if they go through a normal zoning process, they have to go through the special use permit. But if they didn't go through it because of the special 2006, would it behoove us to put it into the contract?
To require them to go through that process?
What's that?
To put into the agreement that they're required to go through the special use permit process?
Or just that, as Rob said, that they, that there is a special use ability to take the property back in a year or sometime down the line if it didn't work, because that is in the special use permit.
By law, we cannot require them to go through that process right now. So if you want to change the parameters by which we could take back the property, then I think after public comment, when it turns to deliberation, then you can
Okay, that's what I was kind of getting clarification on, is if that's what they chose to do, then that we would have to protect ourselves, which we wouldn't have to do if they went through the regular special use permit. Does that make sense?
Well, it makes sense if the rest of the council is on board to linking revocation of the right to continue to operate to a special use permit. I don't think we're there yet.
Okay, all right, so that's what that's why I was unclear as to when to bring it up. That's all. Thank you.
Vanessa?
This question is for Matt. For any decision makers on the dais this evening that still have not chosen to tour the facilities in Medford, can you elaborate a little bit on how the structure of the 3 separate shelters work alongside each other?
Well, we've kind of stumbled into a operational model that's been pretty amazing down in Medford. So the urban campground was created in partnership with the city of Medford and the Medford Livability team, so that we could begin moving people away from the greenway, and that way we could limit some of the fire risk, but at the same time provide a space where people could go to where we could wrap services around. When we ended up opening the campground, that kind of became ground zero for many of the folks that we serve, where we first get them into our programs. What we have found is that by using the urban campground to de-escalate people and bring them out of crisis, we can then use that program to help feed into our Hope Village, into our Kelly Shelter programs. And so it's created kind of a continuum where the Kelly Shelter, or the urban campground, feeds the Kelly Shelter feeds Hope Village, and then from Hope Village, people move on to independent housing in the community, or oftentimes our group housing or our apartments. And so this continuum kind of feeds itself and kind of moves people along. But what we found is that providing an urban campground to stabilize individuals is absolutely crucial because it made all the other programs within that continuum that much stronger.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hey, Aaron, I was just going to ask you to please clarify on ARPA funding. I believe one of the pillars includes social services and specifically mentions housing and care for homeless and underserved populations. Could you clarify that?
Yeah, that would fall under the first pillar, which is the public health emergency and negative impacts associated with households, small businesses, and nonprofits. And that includes.
Aaron, you got the mic?
Yeah, this type of activity or request for grant funds is an allowable use under the first pillar of the 4 pillars that is focused on public health emergencies. And it specifically states that monies can be targeted for the unhoused and homeless issues. And so that is specifically highlighted there. We don't think that there is any issue with utilizing the funds for this type of activity under the first pillar. It's broad enough but specific to call out this type of need, and especially going for low to moderate income anything and COVID related, and I think it could be linked to both of those.
Thank you. Any further questions right now? All right, thank you, gentlemen. We do need to open this up to public comment. So if there's anybody in the audience who wanted to speak on this is an opportunity to do so. Please come forward and tell us your name. Make sure the microphone is on. And when the yellow light goes off, you'll have 30 seconds. You have 3 minutes total, but when the yellow light goes off, you have 30 seconds remaining. Hello.
Rika Brown, Grants Pass. The letters were flying earlier there about RMV, this and that and the other thing. It's really nice to have finally said real market value. And on the presentation, I did not see real market value. I saw assessed value and I saw sales price. The assessed value is always a fair bit lower than market value, or usually. Though my property did sink, market value sank below the assessed value, and therefore I ended up with lower taxes because it had to go down. Now, what would really make this sustainable is to charge a little money for the use of the campsites. And this is what the idea for a hostel is based on too, is that people can come up with a few dollars a day to have a place to sleep. And this is, this is what can make it sustainable for, such operations sustainable. Of course, with the hostel, it would be hundreds of cots in a large room. And that could feed into the urban campground where you would have these pallet shelters that are at least private. And they're fairly good shelter too. So, something to think about there. This, 75 campsites, as Joel would say, are not going to get the campers out of our parks. Got to think bigger. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Please come forward and tell us your name.
Judy Ahrens. Just listening on this, because I don't attend the council meetings very often, because I came over for a public comment that's coming up next. But in hearing these discussions, I want to thank Councilor King, because he had some good questions with all this stuff buying property. If I understand this correctly, because I'm only getting bits and pieces tonight, what I understand is that we're providing some park or land for, just after an hour's discussion, I'm hearing the word finally of homeless. I wasn't aware when we use these big fancy terms that we were using, social services and all that. I think we just need to get down, instead of get really deep in the weeds, what is this really all about? I'm looking at our wonderful chief back here, and with your comments about what kind of a caliber, I'm saying I'm compassionate, and we want people. We don't, I mean, I'm helping people all the time, people with the economy down and what's happening at the national level, how it's affecting the city. I understand that. It's rough. A lot of stores are closed, and these people worked hard, and now some of them are just, you know, they can't pay their mortgage payments, and all these things are happening. So we all get it. But is this the way we want to go? To put a park someplace and have these people, and then some of them that will be mingled in there might not be the caliber, as Councilman King was saying, and that's going to affect our chief of police back here. I'm concerned about him. He's got his hands full already, and he's such a nice guy anyway. I like him. But I'm just saying that there might be something else. I've always been taught growing up with my dad being such a great guy, think outside the box. Sometimes what we do, like I was telling a friend this morning at breakfast, we always feel like the government's going to take care of our problems. The government's not always going to take care of our problems. The government sometimes creates our problems. And this can be a problem in itself for the average person, who I understand in the city only makes about $35,000 or $40,000. They don't make a lot of money. So they're kind of struggling anyway, and they're trying to do the best they can. I just don't know, going this route, and after hours discussion, and then I finally hear the word homeless, because like I say, these fancy terms here get me confused, since I don't come very often. I deal with so many other things in my community. That I think you should give that more thought. Give that something, start thinking outside the box. What can we do? And I really like what Councilor King said, because he wants us to be concerned, what is a caliber? There's going to be good people there. There might also be some people that our chief is going to have to deal with, and that's not fair to our wonderful chief. Thanks.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wanted to speak? Please come forward and state your name.
Hi, my name is Dorothy Swain. I live in Grants Pass. I've never spoken at a city council meeting before. I'm honored to be here. And I just want to say that I think that the urban campground is a marvelous idea. I think that our compassion needs to extend to the least able to provide for themselves in our society. And I'm glad that you are considering it. So you all have my thanks.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? Please come forward. Don't be shy.
Valley Herald. I am opposed to the urban campground in its current location. I am not opposed to the idea of an urban campground. I see that there is a need. In that current location that has been presented, it is 0.3 miles from an elementary school. It is 0.4 miles from the alternative school, Gladiolus High School, for our city. I think that should be evaluated. I think that should be looked at closely. I also think the price should also be evaluated a little closer. I know it has been emphasized that there is one realtor who has agreed that this is the real market value. I think that it would behoove the city to get a comparative market analysis from multiple realtors who are familiar with commercial properties in the area. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Is there anyone else?
Hi, Sam Engel. Closer than I meant to be. I just kind of wanted to underscore the opportunity to create the housing pipeline that Matt was describing a little while ago, of creating social services that do kind of interconnect together for somebody's betterment, so that you've got a low barrier place for someone to come out of the parks or off the street into the campground, escalate from the campground into a program like the shelter or into Foundry Village, and then be able to move into independent housing. I think Grants Pass has a real opportunity to invest in short-term, invest in this piece of property, and then long-term, invest in the infrastructure of housing in the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wanted to speak on this? Please come forward.
Bill Williams, Grants Pass. I think it's a marvelous thing that this is happening. It really is. And I'd like to thank All Care. I think they're a great corporate citizen. I appreciate everything they do. The other thing is, no matter how well intentioned this thing is, and there, but for the grace of God, go all of us, should it ever happen to us, heaven forbid. The question or curiosity is, this house is 75 people. That's wonderful. For the 3 or 4, it doesn't help them. They're still homeless and sleeping in the woods or wherever. I don't know, although this is a great stopgap measure, I don't know if there's any future long-range plans to take care of the problem. It's such a complex problem, I understand. There's no magic solution. But I don't know if anybody's working on the long-term problems to it, which we all got to work on. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else?
Cindy Auger, Grants Pass, Oregon. I think what you guys are doing is wonderful. It's very compassionate. I see the homeless a lot, especially where I work downtown. Sometimes I step over them going into my work. I look at them and I wonder what would they look like if they had an opportunity like this. But with that being said, and looking at your diagram up here and the amount of money, and it's only 75 units, so is that going to be just for an urban campground? Is there going to be another process that they go to inside that to go graduate to a new program with the help of Rogue Retreat, All Care, what have you? Those are my concerns, but I think what you're doing overall is compassionate and wonderful, and need to keep up the hard work, not give up. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, we will close public comment and turn it over to the council for discussion. Kurt?
Let me kick it off. In answer to Joel, with the lost opportunities, I think you know what I'm going to say. If we keep going the way we're going, we're going to end up where we're at. We have to do something. And I think this is a reasonable choice. And as bad as I want it, and I have wanted it bad, and I've said something to everybody about how frustrated I was with the progress, I also know that if when you want something in the worst way, that's usually how you get it. So I am in favor of making the agreement with the money. I'm not in favor of discussing that particular property at this time. I think we need to have a little more discussion on that to convince us. Thanks.
Thank you. Valerie, Joel.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, I will step forward and just say that I've heard two things over and over. One of them is compassion, and one of them is enforcement. And I do believe those are the two pieces that are the beginning of this. And you're right, this has been an age-old project. We are talking, it's taken us 15 years to get here, and it's not going to happen gloriously overnight. And I think people need to know and understand that by having a campground, it's not going to magically solve the problems in the park. But it is the compassionate thing to do, and I really do believe that. So I am in favor of a social service agreement with All Care. They are one of the few, them and Rogue Retreat, because when we went through our process of redoing our zoning to make this permit and this process work in our community, because we didn't really have something, we changed it from transient to social services facility. And you're right, we bother you, but trust me, it's beyond me. I can't believe I'm speaking to speak. But anyway, it's a process. But we went through a huge process to get to this point, and part of that process was to do the special permit and have a process by which we put the property through. And I think we owe that to everybody in our community to say that, yes, we are willing to go through this agreement. I do believe that if we ask them to go through the special use permit, it will probably not get through, but I don't think they plan on having it get through till March anyway. Nobody's gonna slam this thing together because I don't think you can do it that way. I think that I'm in favor of giving the money to All Care. I don't disagree with maybe getting some other, and asking the buyers to get some other realtor input. I think that's a responsible thing to do with taxpayer money. But I am in favor of approving the social service grant agreement and having the property go through the channels that we have established for transient housing and special use permit. Does that make sense?
Joel?
So I agree with Kurt that no action is not a viable alternative, because no action is not compassionate. I don't think people living in the park is compassionate. I would ask the nonprofits to work with the legal system, if you care to, so that I wouldn't let my dog live in the park. And I don't understand why some social services, that's what they're supporting, and I don't understand that. The other thing that strikes me is we had a primary care office supported very strongly by All Care, and we had 300 All Care patients. At times it went up to 400 or 500 depending on the need. And a lot of those were Medicaid. And then we participated with a plan that was in collaboration with Oregon Health Sciences University and the National Health Service. And we assigned a risk to each one of our Medicaid patients. And we had high-risk patients and we had low-risk patients. And we had social determinants, as you're well familiar with, to define what is a high-risk patient. And they're at risk of becoming homeless. American medical system is great for treating illness. It's not great at keeping us healthy. Keeping us healthy is a lot less expensive than treating illness. Preventing homelessness is a lot less expensive than treating homelessness, and it's a lot more successful if you can catch it early. And so what we would do with this, with the Oregon Health Sciences University, they funded a psychologist who was in with our primary care. If we had somebody that was going to lose their home, get divorced, if there was an alcoholic father, he was going to get kicked out by his son, I'm talking real things here. If we had somebody who had drank so much that they left their car downtown and it was a Jaguar and they didn't even know where it was, and they were homeless, you work with them early on with mental health services and addiction services to keep them from becoming homeless. If you wait till they become homeless, you got a 40% chance of maybe being successful. If you can prevent them from becoming homeless, it's a lot more inexpensive and it's a lot more effective. So when I look at stepping stones that the school board's doing, Brian, at Riverside Elementary Park, they're embedding the psychologist in the schools for troubled kids to help to solve some of these family pathologies that result in homelessness. If all we do is put them in a tent and try to reclaim them, and we don't treat these family pathologies, it's going to be up and down the West Coast like you see it today. And it's not going to get any better. And you're going to spend and we're going to spend a lot of your money to do that. So I would challenge us to think a little bit differently about this to be even more effective. And as such, I'll respect everybody's vote here, and, but I'm going to be voting no for that reason, because having worked with providing care management plans for those people, when I go down there and I see them in the park, I look for my patient or for Judy's patients. I haven't seen any. And there was a lot of people that were really needy. They got help with the Gospel Rescue Mission, or they turned around, or we actually paid for some of them to stay in a motel out of our own pocket. Compassionate, but trying to keep them from becoming homeless rather than letting them slide down to where they've hit bottom, and some of them need to make a change, and some of them won't change even after they hit bottom. But it's a lot more cost effective, and it's a lot more successful. And so Brian always asks me, well, what's your plan? I think that's a good question. My plan would be, we need to invest those dollars in prevention. We need to invest these in these kids. Stepping stones in Riverside. We need to invest it in primary care, who are seeing the Medicaid population that are at risk. We need to identify those people that are at risk of becoming homeless and provide mental health and addictive resources that will prevent them from living in a tent in the rain in Riverside Park, and then we'll feel good because we give them a sleeping bag. So the other thing I just want to leave you with, and it brings tears to my eyes, and I'm sorry, because there's a lot of pain out there. There's different incentives that the medical community has in treating patients. The incentive of treating sick people means you want to get as many sick people in as you can. If the incentive is you get paid to keep people healthy, you act differently. And so, Judy, in the first part of her career, she had the incentive to treat sick people. And she did it very well, and she still does. The last 5 years, working with Oregon Health Sciences University, the psychologist, we also had a pharmacist on our staff. I mean, she's a family nurse practitioner. She's not even an MD. We made twice as much money because Oregon Health Sciences, Medicare, and All Care supported that concept, and it worked. At least I haven't found any of them in the park. I'm sure we probably failed somewhere along the line. Probably some of them have died. But anyway, that's my thoughts. I think we're chasing a model that is not economically viable. It is compassionate. It will help some people. We'll have 40% success rate of 75 people every 6 months. There's over, according to the lawsuit, there was over 1,500 people that were homeless 3 to 4 years ago, probably 3,000 now, I don't know. So you're talking 75 people out of 2,000 people. You're talking 3% of the population, if it gets fully used and if it's fully successful, will be treated at a great cost that we can't duplicate for the rest of the 98% of the population that's homeless. So I think we need to wake up. And thanks for listening.
Thanks, Brian, and then Rick.
Thank you, Joel. I do agree with you on some things, Joel. And one of the things that I agree with you on is that prevention is important. That is a key piece in all of this. And thankfully, prevention is kind of baked into this whole plan. Part of what Rogue Retreat does is they have case management on site for anyone that's in the campground. So, prevention is a piece, but prevention doesn't help the people that are already homeless. You can't prevent it, they're already homeless. So, there's case management that's provided to get people out of homelessness, because that's another part of the solution too. And as far as the economic viability of this project, The city of Grants Pass does not have any sort of ongoing financial commitment. We are doing a one-time upfront grant to get this off the ground. We are not committed to any sort of long-term ongoing funding for this project, so I don't want anyone to think that we are. And the fact that this project could potentially be helping 75 to 150 people that are unhoused in our community every 6 months, over time, that's going to make a big difference. It's not going to make a big difference at first, but as people move through and as the years go on, it's effective. And it's effective for anywhere from 40 to 60% of the people that go through that program. So, I just wanted to start with that. And then I also wanted to kind of move into the fact that council has been talking about and working towards getting this going all year. And we're kind of getting to the point to where we're ready to go on it. And I think there is council support to move forward in some fashion. At this point, I think really the sticking points are just kind of in the details. So, the way the agreement is currently written, I think it's not really fair to All Care and to Rogue Retreat to have a situation where anytime after the first year, the city can unilaterally decide to pull the plug on the project for no reason. That does not set them up for success, as Rob said. And we do want this to succeed. We don't want this money to go to waste. We don't want our unhoused to continue to languish. So I would be in favor of changing the language in the agreement to something that more closely mirrors what we have in our social services code amendment that we did earlier this year, to where, for that permit, whatever the organization is has to meet certain requirements. They have to, there has to be reason for the permit to be revoked. So I would suggest that we have something about basically just setting it up with the structure of how we have the social services code amendment structured, where the permit is for 4 years. After the 4-year period, they have an opportunity to have a renewal on that permit, and I believe those renewals are ongoing every 4 years. So as long as the entity that has the permit is performing and there are no issues, they can continue to operate under that permit. And as long as All Care and Rogue Retreat operates this as an urban campground as defined by Mark, which I was satisfied with Mark's definition of what an urban campground is when he said it earlier tonight, I would be in favor of having those changes put into the agreement that's before us. Thank you.
Thank you. Rick?
I know this is a sensitive subject, and I guess I'm not totally comfortable with the direction we have before us tonight, and I just want to express some of my concerns. I guess I would like to see an actual appraised value and not just a ballpark. Another aspect, I spoke with some neighbors today. They were unaware that the city council was moving forward with this. So I feel that aspect, the public is not totally aware that we're doing this. So then are we really responding to transparency, which has been one of our ideals? Another thing, when I was in Eugene, they had the advantage, they already had the property. So they didn't have to buy the property, they were just able to set up the campgrounds. And I think also the fact that Medford was able to lease the property is a real advantage. When it comes to spending $1 million, I guess I'd rather see that money go towards buying a motel that gives opportunity for people to have an apartment to live in, or even consideration of Foundry Village, expansion of that. And I don't know if that's feasible or not, but I just feel I'm not real comfortable with the dollar amount. I think there could be other things that would be more beneficial in moving forward. So again, I have real hesitancy on this matter before us tonight, because I think there's other opportunities that we should consider with $1 million. Thank you.
Vanessa?
I'll preface my statement this evening in response to Councilor Riker that the development of an urban campground is a 2-star priority on the City Council's strategic plan. It is extremely transparent that this has been a priority of ours since January of this year. I did want to also review some statistics that we know, specifically of our community. 3 out of 4 renters with extremely low incomes are paying more than 50% of their incomes on rent. We do know that the pandemic and economic downfall that occurred further spurred those on the brink of financial distress into dire situations. Oregon's tight housing market has overwhelmed the housing crisis. High rents put more households into cost-burdened situations, and personal crises pushed some of those severely cost-burdened households into homelessness. Members of our homeless population are veterans, students, fully employed individuals, retired seniors, and more. The reasons for entering homeless vary significantly from person to person. The latest point-in-time count estimated 1,600 homeless individuals in Josephine County, and Josephine County has the 2nd highest count of homeless K-12 students. Reasons for homelessness. We know that our community has experienced decades of underbuilding for the type of housing that we need. This leads to basic supply and demand issues, further driving market prices of homes. For anyone who recently received their property tax statement that were mailed out, I would encourage you to review it again and notice how much your real market value has increased in a single year. Our community's wages are not increasing alongside this. The reasons for entering homelessness vary widely from person to person, and here's some examples of why someone may find themselves in this situation. Women fleeing domestic violence, veterans unable to receive the services that were promised to them, fully employed individuals who cannot make ends meet, students who cannot afford housing while they study, home foreclosure, grief, despair, and so much more. So we know that this problem exists. We know it's increasing annually. Where do we go from here? Our community will not make progress on homelessness if the work is done only by those who directly serve homeless on a daily basis. The problem is far too big for that. Progress will require collective action by a range of actors. This could include public and nonprofit agencies, federal partners, state policymakers, business leaders, philanthropies, and universities, specifically that can lead in research and policy for innovation. So at this time, there is no standard formula for a solution to this growing West Coast crisis, but I believe that tonight's discussion is a step in the right direction. We have a nonprofit to the south of us doing the day-to-day work with unhoused populations, and they have found success. They want to come here and replicate their successful model. Knowing all of these facts and considering the complexity of this issue, as a policymaker and a resident of this community, I cannot, with a good conscience, advocate for inaction as a solution. And with all of that said, I do support moving forward with the social services grant this evening with an amendment to the restrictive covenant to be more in line with our special use permit timeline for revocation. Thank you.
Discussion, DJ, then Joel.
Sure, let's see. I agree, Joel, with what you said. I agree with basically what most of has been said tonight. The angle that I'm taking contention with is the procedure of how we've come here, primarily. I'm going to use the sale of River Road Reserve as a primary example of the former council being under extreme scrutiny for 3 primary reasons. One, we were scrutinized for having a sweetheart deal with the buyer of River Road Reserve, whereas the council made an RFI process to evaluate anybody interested in the purchase of that property. They created a task force in 2009 that was very unfavorable for the city maintaining that property. There's community and leadership input, and we had 10 public opportunities just like this one for constituents to provide their input. And what's happening this evening is none of those 3 have been even entertained in regards to the purchase of this property. Procedurally, we have an ARPA survey out. A portion of that ARPA survey asks the constituents of this community, the owners of the money that this board is supposed to be a warden of, that actually asks them, should we allocate any money to social services, and provides them an opportunity to give us input as to how we're supposed to do that. The county often has historically utilized the ballot for garnering direction from constituents, particularly when it involves taxpayers' money. That has not been entertained. That could be done as early as May. I think that this is extraordinarily fair to All Care in that we are essentially granting them $1 million of taxpayers' money. I'm not belittling their efforts. I'm not belittling that there is a need for this in this community, but this is happening far too fast. Another thing I want to think about is this community could not afford this kind of allocation or operation of a social services facility like this if it wasn't for ARPA money, and that we need to be very thankful for. But I always have to think about when you get money that falls out of the sky, because apparently it happens every once in a while. Could we do this without severe budget cuts to our current operations? No, we could not. So we need to think about that in these kind of terms. Think about this as a lease, right? As far as fairness to All Care. We would not, I hope not, afford them a permanent lease, right? There would be some agreement that says that this lease can be terminated unilaterally for basically whatever reason. Use examples like the food bank in this community, extraordinarily successful to feeding the people that need food in this community. That's a lease agreement between the city who owns the property and the food bank who operates it. So I'm not buying into that this would not be successful with constraints. As far as the city's involvement, I'm going to use Foundry Village as the shining star, poster child of the involvement of the community that brings something together for social services in this community. The money was raised by the private industry. It was supported by the nonprofit industry. It's a great project. The city's involvement in that was creating a specific development code to allow for that to happen, of which we had many meetings of public comment to try to garner that specifically addresses the needs of this community. That was done right. That is the job of this board, okay? I don't want to take an urban campground off of the list of opportunities. What I'm taking exception to is, as Joel mentioned, there are other opportunities, economic opportunities that this ARPA money could do. This is a very quick decision without input for our constituents to spend 13% of that money. Are we gonna move forward and spend more of that money? I can't determine that, but what I have determined at this point is we haven't evaluated the options at this point. Given that I don't necessarily agree with the property, the price, the proximity to schools, etc., and I see these as inextricably linked, I can't support this. Would I support it in the future with the voice of the constituents of this community? Yes, I would. I haven't heard enough. I am not being told by this community to do this, and therefore I can't support it.
Joel.
So I just had a couple random thoughts. One is that this board needs to make a decision timely to be fair to our very credible nonprofits. And we need to move ahead in whatever direction we decide to take them. And we all need to respect each other and listen to each other as we've been doing, which I honor each one of us for that. That is tremendous. The other thing I want to say is I look forward to the discussion on our agenda for mental health and addiction services that we have as to trying to enhance them in the community. I can't tell you, I've had people that you know that were high school athletes come to us addicted to hydrocodone, and they had to go to Medford to get treatment. I have to tell you that we've had psychologists in our office that got burned out, quit, and it was another 2 months until we could get one from Options. And Options, bless their heart, was trying hard. So people didn't have those prevention services. We have dads, grandfathers who are alcoholics that didn't get treated. So I look forward to that presentation and with gusto, because I think it's going to be effective, and regardless of how we vote on this, it's a needed action. So I commend all of us for listening to each other and vigorously debating this. This has been wonderful. So thank you.
Valerie?
Yes, I agree with you, Joel, and I do believe we need to move forward with at least a motion. So I am going to make a motion. I'm going to make a motion to approve the resolution entering into social services grant agreement with All Care. I do believe that with the purchase price, that in the second part of it, in the contract, that All Care needs to present a city purchase and sale agreement, which has to be approved at a second meeting, if I'm not correct, that we would have to approve it. We can't just approve it here. If I'm reading this correctly?
No, you could approve it right here.
Okay, well, I would like to have it brought forward with a second assessment of some sort from another realtor to make sure that represents a reasonable purchase price. So I would like to have that confirmed by another source. And once it's approved, it says, in the event city approves the agreement for the purchase of the property, which we would do after we saw a second, then the money would come forward. I do also believe that I want the amendment that you defined urban campgrounds. I think you did a nice job of that, Mark. And I would also like to have added to that, for the transparency, that we follow the planning course where they go through the process for a special use permit. Is that something I can add?
So, in looking at HB 2006, it exempts transitional housing from the land use process. So certain elements of our special use permit are preempted by this, at least temporarily. If it's strictly just a tent campground, it probably doesn't qualify as traditional housing or transitional housing. If there's some, more structural type elements, some pods or pallet shelters or mini houses or something, then it would be transitional housing. So it really kind of depends on what their proposal is. So if you want them to go through this process, I think a better way, I think one, what I'm gathering is you want the process, I'm gonna guess, for two reasons. One is for public notice purposes. So we could follow, if things go the way you're kind of proposing, it could come back with another proposal or more information on this proposal. Once we receive that, then we could send out notice of it as if it were a land use hearing.
Okay.
All right? It doesn't have to be a land use hearing, but we can pretend it's a land use hearing and do the notification that would be required to surrounding property owners if it were a land use hearing. So that's an option. The other element that I think that you like about the special use permit is we could tie their continued ownership of the property to
their success,
certain performance standards or something that's analogous to what's required in the special use permit.
Correct.
We can paraphrase that language or incorporate similar language into the restrictive covenant that would achieve that without making them go through that process per se. I don't want them to have to go through an unnecessary land use procedure when they don't have to. At the same time, we can still do the notification as if it were a land use process.
Yes, you've caught the gist of it, because I do think it's very important that we go through the public process, that is a transparent way that we go about doing it. And I also agree, as Rob brought up, that it needs to be tied into the special use language for if it were to not function, there would be a process by which it back and forth would be decided. So can I make that motion? I mean, did I make that motion?
I believe you just did.
Okay.
So you can make it, but I wouldn't be satisfied with it at this point from a drafting perspective, because I'm gonna have to change this document around, so I think we can talk a little bit more about.
Well, and I think that goes back to our question in the beginning. Is this a one-step or two-step process? And I think that's and I think part of the issue is, honestly, I've never liked having something put on the dais the night of without the due diligence of it and just gone with it. So that's part of my issue, is that it's the rush of it and not feeling that I have a hands-on feel for whether this is truly okay.
Yeah, well, and understand that aspect, but, you know, we provided council with information as soon as we possibly could have.
I know, I understand that.
So I think a motion is a bit premature because we want to make sure we get the drafting right. If council or the majority of council is generally on board with some kind of performance standards related to special use permit, then we can start talking about that and how that would apply to this.
So what you're saying is make a motion to move forward and have you draft a motion for consideration at the next business meeting.
Well, so why don't I,
no,
in aid of what you're going for here, I'm going to summarize, at least I'm going to try to do it on the fly, 14.100, special use permit. And so special use permit says the term of the permit shall be 3 years. The permit may be renewed and extended for an additional 3-year term at the end of each term. If the site has demonstrated full compliance with the permit conditions and no substantial modifications to the special use permit are proposed, the city manager or designee may authorize a one-time extension of 3 years. A permit extension beyond 6 years or any substantial change to the operation, including an increase in persons served of more than 10%, requires a new public hearing before the city council. So, you know, something council consider is...
Mark, I gotta interject here. That is not the current one that we adopted. There was a couple things in there that I noticed that were not the adopted version. One was 4 years and the other one was, and then the other part was the city manager shall and not may. So I just want to make sure that those details were right when we're talking about it.
All right, so I meant to say 4, I accidentally said 3. And I did that twice in a row.
Nice cover, Mark.
And when I said 6 years, I meant 8 years.
Yeah. Of course you did.
So I guess those are starting points for discussion, or maybe that's the entire discussion. I mean, you know, at the end of 8 years, it requires a new public hearing. So would you want this to say at the end of 8 years, then at that point the council has the option to make the repurchase? Or is it just a perpetual thing where as long as they're in compliance with some standards that don't necessarily apply to this, it just keeps going? I mean, the choice is yours.
So at this point, we have about half a motion on the table, or maybe 2 times as much motion as we need one way or the other, but
I think perhaps, at least if I have some ideas about how it's supposed to go, maybe we may have to consider it at another meeting, just so I have time to write something that makes sense and at least get the number of years right in each instance that applies.
Sure.
And council can see it in front of them and digest it, but I'm willing to try
need
to
to
write it
reach
up as
some
we
sort
go
of
here.
agreement, even just to provide direction on what we want to do in the future. So what do you
I
think,
guess maybe
Valerie?
I can, let's see, I don't know all this fancy Robert's Rules of Order, but I know I can extend it to a further meeting, and in the meantime, ask for you to draft up a proposal as what we've just said, that gives more transparency with the permitting process, and with that also adds that what we talked about earlier, tying it in with the most recent social services zone change or code amendment.
Yeah, so the aspect that you first mentioned about public notice and all that, that doesn't have to be in the agreement. That's just how we can conduct ourselves and how we'd schedule the hearing if that's council's
And that
desire.
doesn't have to be put in there, we can just do that.
You can
is
just
what you're
do
saying.
that,
Okay.
yes. As far as linking it to the special use permit, I'm still struggling with that a little bit. I mean, you take those concepts and apply it. But the special use permit also, you know, states no substantial change to the operation. Well, they're not committing to a certain number of occupants, et cetera. Like here it says an increase in persons served of more than 10%. We're
I
not.
think that was 15.
15, that's what I meant. we're not asking them to commit to a certain number at this stage or anything. So it's a little bit harder to apply these metrics to this that are not there from the inception.
We have a couple of complicating issues going on.
Yeah, we do, because the
So-
crazy part of this is if it came after June 2022, we wouldn't have to go through all this craziness.
Well, depending when, what they'd want to do there, maybe they would have to. If it's just strictly tents, then they probably would need to apply for the special use permit.
So, but if it's pallet shelters, they don't, is what you're saying.
Which is a little bit hard to understand because one is certainly more permanent, and you would think would be perhaps a higher level of review, but we have what we have.
Well, what do you have down for me so far on that, Sarah?
Well, I have that you were making a motion to approve the social services grant agreement, but that you wanted to include a second assessment of the real market value from a different realtor, that you wanted to include the definition of urban campground that Mark had mentioned earlier that lists off various types of shelters that might be included, that you want to work something in regarding the planning process that would, and this is kind of where it gets messy, I guess, tie it to this special use permitting process. And I'm not sure if you're doing that in lieu of, if that's an amendment to the covenant.
Okay, that's what it was, but I actually will step back and say that reality is, I mean, I do believe in looking after the city. I do believe in the fact that that I have enough trust that I don't think that the city's just going to yank it for whatever, but by putting that $1 perpetual non-expiring option in there, I think that's just to make sure that the money is taxpayer money. It is going to stay as taxpayer money, and we can get it back if it doesn't work. So I will just take that out and say I will get rid of that third confusing part and just go with the first two. I move to approve the resolution entering into a social service grant agreement with All Care, asking for a second assessment of the purchase price so that we can double check that, and then
And including a definition of
including the
urban
definition,
campground?
the campground, yes.
Okay, and not making any
Nope, I'll just let that go and we'll
changes
see
to
where we go.
item number 4, I guess, on that list at this point? Okay. Is there a second? Second from Rob, thank you. All right, we need to have discussion on the motion here. I think just to clarify, we have multiple parts going on here, right? So we have the social services grant agreement, which really could apply to any property being used for this purpose. We also have the restrictive covenant, which has kind of come up, and that's where the $1 purchase buyback option comes into play. So I think it's possible that the motion on the table right now just involves the grant agreement, does not involve the covenant. And then we have other discussions going forward.
Mayor, they're all in one. I mean, the covenant is an exhibit to that agreement.
Okay.
It is incorporated within that agreement.
Is that the way you intend it, Valerie, is to do the covenant as written? Okay, so it would include the covenant as written, which does not actually include a specific property, but there's a line in here for it. So are you...
Explain the line that you're talking about.
On the covenant, at the top of the covenant, it says that it's to purchase the property located at, and then it's blank.
And so the reason for that is this would be recorded, and it also says and described on Exhibit 1. I use normally a legal description would be Exhibit A or Exhibit B, but I decided not to do that because we have Exhibit A here, and if I had Exhibit A to Exhibit A, then that would be confusing. This is just to illustrate that the intention is this would be recorded on the title of whatever property is ultimately settled on.
Okay, so at this point, we're able to vote on the covenant language without it being tied to any particular property?
Right.
Okay, because Valerie mentioned specifically she does not want her motion to include voting on the property tonight.
Well, correct. So she doesn't want to approve the disbursement of funds for a particular property pursuant to the agreement just now. So you can approve the agreement
Right.
without saying, yes, we're going to pay you to buy the N Street property or whatever other property it may be.
Right, and I believe, unfortunately, I don't recall whether Valerie mentioned it just in discussion or as part of her motion, but that you specifically did not want us to decide on the parcel tonight. Is that?
Well, I guess my question with that was the fact that I didn't have a chance to really look over all of the things there, and that was what was put on the dais tonight, but we could approve, that could come after we do the
Right.
approval.
I just want people to be clear on
Yes,
what they're
I
voting
agree.
on.
The actual property, I wrote in here in the grant agreement that you could vote to give, you cannot vote to give money for a particular property until you've already passed the resolution authorizing the city manager to enter into the grant agreement. Now, theoretically, if we're in a big hurry to authorize a particular piece of property, we can make those changes, print it out, and have you sign the resolution and have you sign the grant agreement tonight. We can do that. But we could not have any motion made to disburse funds pursuant to that agreement until that agreement is signed. So those are two separate votes. One is voting on a resolution. The other would be a vote on a motion to say, okay, you've presented us this property. We've got this existing social services grant agreement. We're gonna put money in escrow for you guys to buy this.
Right, I understand. So at this point, the motion is on creating the grant agreement, but not on providing the funds for any particular property, and that Valerie specifically does not want us to vote on that immediately later tonight. Is that correct?
Well, my motion is to not do that. My motion is just simply for the agreement.
Okay.
I mean, you guys can decide, somebody else can come up with a different motion if that's something that somebody else chose. But I'm saying I am willing to put my money out to say, yes, we need an urban campground, and yes, we need to do the agreement to go into that, but it doesn't include the piece of property at this.
Okay, but your motion doesn't exclude us from talking about that later if that were to come up for some reason. Okay, just, you guys are all shaking your heads at me. She did specifically mention that earlier tonight. That's why I'm clarifying. Okay, discussion on the motion. Vanessa.
Yeah, I support your original motion, Councillor Lovelace, on modifying the restrictive covenant. And I think, for clarification, I think the spirit in which you were headed was perhaps under the same circumstances of the special use permit, rather than it being not earlier than 1 year after All Care's acquisition. Perhaps you were thinking not earlier than 4 years of All Care's acquisition. And additionally, the option to repurchase the property for $1 unilaterally would be under the condition that the facility was not running the property under its intended use. So I don't know if that helps clarify your original motion, but I support it in the way that it was originally brought forward.
Rob, then Kurt.
Yeah, I agree also. The way it was originally brought forward makes more sense for several reasons. We heard Doug mention tonight that he's speaking to someone about paving. We've also heard tonight about the possibility of long-term restrooms or long-term showers. I just can't see expecting All Care and Rogue Retreat to really do a great job if the possibility of the property being pulled out from under them is always there. And I wouldn't expect necessarily this council to do that. There's an election in 22, there's an election in 24. You just never know what the next council is going to be thinking about. But I wouldn't want to discourage improvements to that property, whether it's paving, whether it's improvements to restrooms and showers and things like that. And I think having an overly restrictive covenant could potentially do that. So I actually like having a less restrictive covenant, which is similar to what Valerie said originally, and for the reasons that I just stated.
Kurt?
All right, just a thought here. says they have to have a special use permit. What if we were to?
Don't.
We don't know.
Okay, well, let me finish my thought and then we can go from there. My thought is that we put in the covenant that we can't enforce the buyback. If they don't have a permit, then clearly then they might be using it for something else, and so that would be a reason to buy back. And we couldn't do it unless there's due cause. You know, if they break the agreement or whatever, then we can buy it back.
Brian?
Well, this is certainly getting muddy. I appreciate Valerie being so bold as to make a motion to try to move this forward. I don't know that I'm clear enough on exactly what we're voting on to vote yes. I think what Rob conveyed about the restrictiveness of the covenant and for future councils to unilaterally simply decide to, pull the rug out from under this operation just because they, maybe just don't agree with it. I don't think that's fair to the organizations involved. So as I understand it, the motion that Valerie has made does not address that piece of this agreement. And so if I'm understanding that correctly, I'm going to vote no on this and hopefully hone in a better motion after that. Thanks.
Any further discussion? All right, so the motion that's on the table right now is to approve the social services grant agreement with the covenant exhibit A as is, but that we would make an amendment to require a second assessment for real market value, as well as Mark's definition of urban campground. And Valerie, you made the motion, so how do you vote?
I will vote yes.
Brian?
No.
Rob?
No.
Rick?
No.
Kurt?
No.
Vanessa?
Only because I want to see more protection for the nonprofit, no.
DJ?
No.
And Joel?
No.
All right, fails 7-1.
Okay.
Brian?
All right, let's try this again. So I move that we approve the social services grant agreement along with Exhibit A, restrictive covenants and option of purchase. On the social services grant agreement under number 4, I would, and that's on page 164, under number 4, I would strike the sentence that says, furthermore, the covenant shall provide the city shall have the unilateral option to purchase the property back from All Care for $1. The key issue there being unilateral. I would replace that with, furthermore, the covenant shall provide the city the option to purchase back the property from All Care for $1, provided that they are no longer using it for the intended purpose of an urban campground. So that's the first change. And then on the second page, under the restrictive covenants, number 2 is basically saying the same thing as on the previous page. So I would take number 2 and I would change that. Actually, I would just go ahead and strike number 2. And then under number 4, it says, all care shall be required to operate the property as an urban campground, provided that the uses reasonably ancillary and subordinate to urban campground are permitted. And I would probably just add to that something similar to what I said previously. You know, if at any point All Care does not operate the property as an urban campground, at that point the city would be able to exercise a perpetual non-expiring option to purchase the property back from All Care for $1. So that's the second part. I would also incorporate the portions that Valerie had in her original motion about getting at least a second opinion, if not an appraisal, on the value of that property to make sure that it is in line with the uniform guidance. so we know that the property price is reasonable. I would also incorporate Mark's definition of urban campground. And then there's the question of how to mirror it to the Social Services Code Amendment. There's a few pieces there that are kind of floating right now. One of the pieces is with regards to a significant increase in the number of people served. Right now, in the Code Amendment, I believe it's 15%. They have to, I guess, reapply or, do something to that effect. So given what I've heard tonight, the campground is going to have 75 sites, up to 75 sites, and serve up to 150 people. So I think as far as the number of people served increasing, I think we can use those metrics for the 15%. So that part mirrors the code amendment or the social services amendment we made previously. With regards to the property being transitional housing or not, they most certainly are going to have things in addition to tents. So they're going to have pallet shelters, they're going to have potentially other types of dwellings. So that would put it into it would certainly put it into the category of transitional housing. And I've said too much, so that's my motion.
I apologize because I missed on the covenant, restrictive covenant, the section 4. I think you said you would strike 2, and what would you do to 4?
Oh, on number 4, I would just basically add, I would leave number 4 as is, except I would add, if at any point All Care decides to not run the property as an urban campground, the city retains the right to a perpetual non-expiring option to purchase the property back from All Care for $1.
Okay. All right. Second.
And the part about the special use permit, though.
Don't think that was actually necessary to the motion.
Yeah, I wasn't
Okay.
sure if that was
All right.
necessary either, so I think as far as the motion itself goes, it probably ends after what I just
The 4.
clarified
yeah.
for you.
Are you doing a second, Rob? Or
Brian?
okay, well, hang on first. Is there a second? Vanessa with the second. Okay. Rob?
Before there was a second, we should have clarified this, but there's a second appraisal I think is a good idea, but I think a third is probably even better, because if we had one high and one low, where does that leave us? So I'd like to see a third. But I also would question where we're going to say that All Care has to continue to run the urban campground. At what level? In other words, they could have 8 people there and call it an urban campground, and now we've got a piece of property that's kind of non-performing. So I'm just wondering if we were to say at below 50% capacity or below 30% capacity or something like that. I don't know, how does that sound to you? Because I definitely would want the third appraisal, and also the continue to run an urban campground at what capacity?
So with regards to the first part, the appraisal, what we have right now is a broker's price opinion, so we don't even have one appraisal. However, when we get an appraisal, we could certainly get more than one, but I think, all appraisers are going to approach valuing the property in a very similar way. So I personally would be comfortable with just getting one appraisal from a commercial appraiser. Oh, yes.
Just bear in mind, it could take a while to get an actual appraisal. This is not, like appraising a home in a subdivision. This is bare dirt, and that's always kind of harder to find comps. So, right now, some people at least, I think I'm going to guess, we're satisfied with the broker's opinion of value. I'm not telling you shouldn't require an appraisal, but I just want to make sure everyone understands. We've got a broker's opinion of value. Councilor Lovelace just expressed an interest in getting another broker's opinion, and now we're talking about an appraisal. So I'm not really sure we're all having a meeting of the minds on what we're talking about to provide evidence of value.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. And I think what I was trying to go for is what Valerie had said, is getting a second broker's price opinion as opposed to an appraisal, just to
Yeah, I would
double
just say,
check.
just from our experience with the Osland property, that an appraisal takes a long time, especially for a commercial piece, because there's not a lot of commercial turnover. So I think you're really going to hamper their ability to move forward by asking for an appraisal.
Right, so what I was, I guess, referring to, I didn't make the correct distinction between appraisal and a broker's opinion. But what I meant was, because a broker's opinion is basically simple and quick, I meant just getting a third broker's opinion. So then we've got a better idea, because we could have two different opinions, then where are we? But I'd like to see a third one in your motion. And then do we want to also have any capacity as far as them running the campground? Again, at what capacity? Right now it's 75 units, maybe 140 or 150 people. Is there a floor or a bottom limit that we would be satisfied with? And do we want to clarify that in that motion?
Yeah, I'm happy to amend the motion after we kind of clarify this for a second. But I think well, first of all, with the broker's price opinion that we did get, it's from a very experienced, well-known realtor in the community. So I personally would be comfortable just going with that broker's price opinion, but I'm more than happy to amend it to get 2 more broker's price opinions, just so council is satisfied on that. With regards to your second point with the, I guess, capacity and how many people are being served by the campground, I think, and I'm no expert, but I would think at some point it doesn't become cost effective for them to even, if the amount of people they serve is so low, I don't know that it would be, cost effective for them to run it. However, in order to satisfy council, maybe we could have something to where if the urban campground sees below 25% vacancy for a period longer than 6 months, the permit could be revoked or something along those lines. I'm not exactly sure. I'm just kind of saying that as a starting point. So I'm open to opinion on that.
Are you officially amending, or are you just still having a discussion on this one topic?
I don't know that I want to amend at this point.
Okay.
But I probably will later.
Okay. Joel?
If it was me, what I would do is I would add in some language that would provide an incentive to make sure that they're successful. And so like you would have at least 40% of the capacity would be taken off the streets and successfully rehabilitated, and give them that incentive to do that. So that they have that incentive then to do that. Which they do anyway, because they're good people, but it just provides the incentive.
DJ.
So to add to the taking out the unilateral discretion of council, I have to play devil's advocate here in that we have to entertain a hypothetical that, let's say in any indeterminate amount of time, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, this is a disastrous operation and our constituents demand that we eliminate it from our community. The council will not have the authority to do that, and All Care Foundation would have exclusive right to respond to the demand of our constituents, and I'm not comfortable with that.
Brian?
I was just wondering if Mark could clarify what power we have in the Social Services Code amendment to revoke the special use permit, because I know there is some language in there that if, I don't know what the language is, I'm hoping maybe you have it there and you can recite that for us.
Distinct lack of trust in the version of the one that's on my screen right now.
I don't think we changed that part.
Social services can be revoked with a 15-day notice upon a demonstration that the permit holder has failed to comply with the conditions of approval. So I really would like the council to give serious consideration to having a divorce from the special use permit, because it may well not even apply to what they do here. So we can make up some conditions and we can kind of try to mirror that and apply it to this case, but just kind of going in a blanket sense back to special use permit code is kind of like a square peg round hole situation a little bit. We can take those from it, put them into the covenant if that's what you want to do. So you'd have to come out, you would have to create conditions that they failed to meet, conditions of approval of a grant. And so we'd have to sit here and come up with a list of conditions. I think what DJ's getting at is, you know, at some point, and I tend to think that's appropriate for the council to reconsider. I understand a year is quick for the ability for council to say, you know what, this is not working for us. We want to move it, or we want to remove you guys from there. Maybe council considers a longer period of time before that option could come into play. That would simplify things a lot, so we're not going back and forth with the special use permit, say 4 years, 5 years, 10 years, whatever. I mean, name something. But if it's just simply, hey, we have the right to buy it back if you're not operating as an urban campground, well, it could be operating as an urban campground, but the citizens and maybe the council at some point in the future, maybe it's obvious that it's not really working well. Or maybe there's just simply another location. The city would say, hey, we've got this property, we want to move it onto our property now. To forever forsake the city's ability to have influence on what happens there it's questionable what kind of long-term plan that is. So maybe there's a balance between a potential forever occupancy for that use and a fear of forfeiture in the near future, which I understand is present in the proposal that was drafted.
Rob.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I think I agree with your last point that there's a balance, and I appreciate DJ pointing that out. 1 year, though, is definitely that's not balanced to me. Whether it's 2 years, I could agree with that. I'd just like to add too, and I wish I knew the exact figures, but I know that in Medford that initially the city was very, very reluctant to support these types of operations, and actually after the initial 6 months or so, after the initial year, I can't remember, it was the city that came back and actually was asking Rogue Retreat to extend their lease or extend their commitment. So the success over there made it really clear to the city that the city wanted them there. Initially, the city was concerned, but I think 1 year is too short. I could be okay with 2 years, which would gives them a better chance of demonstrating their worth. I still would be concerned that future councils could just write them off, but I think in 2 years, hopefully, they could demonstrate their worth in that location, and I would be okay with that.
Need a motion to extend past 9. Vanessa?
I move to extend past 9 p.m.
Second from Rick, thank you. All in favor of continuing the meeting?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, sorry to interrupt. Who was next? Brian?
So I understand what Mark's saying. We don't want to paint ourselves into a corner. But the concerns I have are that future councils, or who knows, maybe even this council, but future councils are going to have an incentive, the way it's written now, to sell the property. There could be a situation where council has a budget shortfall and they need money, and they're like, oh well, we can just go ahead and take that property back and we can sell it and have some money to do something else with it. Or a future council could just decide that they don't philosophically agree with what's happening at the urban campground. There's just, the way it's written now, there's a lot of concerns about there not being objective standards that are not being met, that are justification for not continuing the urban campground. So I don't know that just extending the amount of time is going to be sufficient, because it's still going to be enticing to future councils to revoke it unilaterally as it's currently stated. Whether, you know, philosophically or financially, there's lots of reasons that could happen. So I would be hesitant to leave that language the way it is, which is why I worded it the way I did. Maybe there's a middle ground that I am not seeing yet. So maybe there's a way to write conditions in here as far as conditions for revocation. And I don't know exactly what those conditions would be, but maybe that's a situation where something, you know, we need to have some objective standards that are not being met to revocate the property, to take the property back from them. I don't think unilateral is the language that we should be using. So if other counselors have ideas as far as conditions for taking the property back, I think that's something that we should probably be considering. But I'm open to those options.
Vanessa?
It's my understanding the council has chosen the path to move forward with a social service grant agreement process and decision because we want to be hands-off from the project. We don't want an association with the ongoing operation of it. So I am concerned with the potential overreach into the operation that the nonprofit is going to be utilizing the land for. So my 2 cents to your question is that I just think as so long as they are using that property for the intended purpose tonight, I see it fit that they continue their operation on it.
Any further discussion on this motion? Brian?
Yeah, I would just say lastly that I know All Care Foundation and Rogue Retreat have a proven track record. I don't think anyone in this room would dispute that. So, you know, as Valerie sometimes says, you have to have a element of trust in some of these things. And I think this is certainly maybe a condition where that applies. And I have full trust and belief that Rogue Retreat and All Care have our community's best interest in mind and the ability to pull this project off successfully.
Thank you. Are you, I believe initially you said assessment. Are you officially changing it to a second broker's price opinion?
Yeah, I would amend the motion to remove the word appraisal and add, I believe Valerie said 2 additional broker's opinions.
2 additional?
Yeah.
Okay. And Vanessa, do you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay. Take a stab at whether I got this down. So we have a motion to approve the social services grant agreement with an amendment that we would receive 3 broker's price opinions, that we would include Mark's definition of an urban campground, that we, on item number 4 on that page 164, at the point where it says, furthermore, the covenant shall provide that the city shall have a unilateral option. We're going to scratch the word unilateral, and we're going to say that the city shall have the option to purchase the property back from All Care for $1 if the city, they are no longer using the property for the intended purpose. On page 165, we would scratch number 2, except that the first sentence of it is going to be moved in just a second here. So we're scratching it as number 2, but in item number 4, which says, All Care shall be required to operate the property as an urban campground, provided that uses reasonably ancillary and subordinate to the urban campground are permitted, and that if they are no longer using it for the intended purpose, the city has a perpetual non-expiring option to purchase the property back for $1. That's all right?
I think you nailed it.
Okay. In that case, Brian made the motion. How do you vote?
Yes.
Rob?
Yes.
Rick?
No.
Kurt?
Yes.
Vanessa?
Yes.
DJ?
No.
Joel?
No.
And Valerie?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-3. Anything further we need to discuss on this tonight? No? Okay. In that case, we will work on the next step of this process, which would involve, I guess we would need to authorize the grant for a specific property once we've received those additional brokers' price opinions.
Yeah, so once they give us additional broker opinions, then what we'll do, but this is not part of the motion, but I think we need to clarify with council, or was it part of the motion?
No.
I'm talking about the public notice part. I think Councilor Lovelace suggested that when it's actually going to be considered by council of the specific property and additional evidence of value of the property, we send out public notice as if it were a land use case.
Okay, is that something that the council needs to agree on, or?
Well, it's something that, yeah, I mean, it would be, I think we need council direction because it's not quote unquote a land use decision, so it would be out of our ordinary course of just a council action item, which is what it would be.
Right. So at this point, we've established the social services grant agreement, but we need to give the grant, right, for a particular use after we've received the 3 brokers' opinions. So that would be our next step, and just to bring that back as a council action item.
Correct. And the question would be, once we're bringing that back, do we want to provide notice, mail out notice, as if it were a land use decision? That was Councilor Lovelace's suggestion.
Okay.
Yes, and just, my thought is just in dealing with transparency to our constituents. I mean, that was part of the whole thing that we went through in this whole process of doing this, is that we were going to be transparent. And I think that it's, you know, whatever decision we make needs to be clear and objective based upon what we would naturally do. But I do think it's important that we bring it forth under those circumstances. It doesn't have to go through the, 45 days and 45 days in front of the Urban Area Planning Commission and whatever. We simply need to do the however many days, how much do you have to send out, how long would that take?
What would the noticing, No. I'm just simply asking, what are the radius parameters of public notice? It's like 100 feet, right? 100 feet, and how many days notice? 20 days notice.
Okay. I can live with that, 20 days.
So this would be, it is automatically going to be a council action item. I guess the question now, council, is whether you want to create an additional notice that's not required, right, as part of this deal, but that you have the option to provide that. And Brian, your hand is up.
Well, I just have a clarifying question because, as I understand it, the reason that we don't have to do this is because of HB 2006. So is it even, I guess, legal for us to require that they go through it anyway because HB 2006 says they don't have to go through it?
We're not requiring them to go through that. The question here is whether or not, in the interest of notifying the public that the city is considering providing funding for an urban campground at a particular location, going through notification as if it were a land use decision, not requiring them to meet land use standards, but just going through that notification, because it is in effect kind of a land use decision in the normal understanding of the term, notwithstanding the, you know, the term of art of land use decision in Oregon. It would not, deciding to fund to buy a property to put an urban campground on is not a land use decision, so it doesn't require public notice. But Councilor Lovelace said this, I think what she's saying is this is something of the magnitude that we ought to make sure the public is informed about this. The way of doing that would be to pretend it's a land use decision when it comes to public notice and mailing out notice to people within 100 feet.
Okay, thanks.
And so do I need a motion to do that? Yes, I will make a motion then that we move forward and notify those within 100 feet of the land to be purchased for the urban campground and give them 20-day notice, and that at that time we'll do a make a decision.
Is there a second? Rick with the second. I have a question for, maybe Doug can answer, because I haven't had a chance to read your sale agreement. What's the timeline associated with that?
There was no timeline set up for acceptance.
Okay.
There's due diligence clauses of timelines, which means we can back out, but there's no timeline for us to accept, or for them to accept our.
Okay, so you don't necessarily have a situation where 30 days and this deal falls through, or, okay.
No, the owner really wasn't intending to sell.
Okay, so there is a motion that we would notify, I guess, neighbors within 100 feet of the property line and give them 20 days notice prior to the next council meeting where we would just be able to discuss this. Rick already seconded. Do you have a question? Okay.
Yeah, that was not a second. I just wanted some clarification. Is this motion initiating the process of the council having a say in which property the urban campground is utilized on?
No. It would be, they bring us, assuming it's this particular property, which I have a strong suspicion that it is, they would, once they bring us the additional broker's opinion of value, or I don't even know if it would need to wait for that. It's just, if you guys could probably get 2 more broker opinions of value within 20 days. Yeah, so I mean, that's easy. So I think if council gives direction to give this noticing, then we could figure out what day it would be on that would meet the 20 days and get started with that, the pace.
Brian.
So I appreciate the idea of the noticing in the spirit of transparency. My concern is that we've already struck out twice this year with facilities. We struck out on the Manzanita property, and we struck out with the hotel. I forget what the name of that was, but you know, one of our big goals this year was to address the homeless problem. And we haven't been able to do it so far. And so my concern with this is that all we're going to get is negative feedback from those neighbors. I mean, let's not fool ourselves here. You know, I mean, it's going to be negative feedback, and I think we all know that. So, and it's going to potentially, you know, scare the owner off from the sale. So that's my concern, is that we've come so far and that we go through this last piece for the sake of transparency, but then it torpedoes the whole deal.
Joel.
So, you know, for the sake of the nonprofits, we don't want to surprise people. I mean, that would be the worst that would happen in terms of your public image. And so there are going to be some people that disagree, and if you really believe in what you're doing, then yeah, that's okay. We need to listen to them with respect, and then you make your decision and move on. To not inform them and to try to avoid the controversy will only make it bigger. I think we've all been part of those things in the past, and they're not very pleasant. So, you know, out of respect to All Care and the other nonprofit, I don't want to set you up to be a fall guy. We need to let the public know, and there will be some people that object, and there might be some people that welcome it. And we'll listen to them, and if there's something there that's of value, we'll make changes, and if there's not, then you decide we will all decide together collectively what's right. We don't forego public involvement just because we feel they may disagree with us. That is dangerous ground. And I don't want to go there, and I don't want you to go there for your own benefit. You know, that is not good public policy. Anyway, my thoughts.
All right, so there is a motion to provide extra notice before our next council action on this issue. Is there further discussion? Okay, Valerie, you made the motion. How do you vote?
Yes.
Brian?
No.
Rob?
Yes.
Rick?
No.
Kurt?
Yes.
Vanessa?
I should have said this just a moment ago during discussion opportunity, but I'm going to vote no, just because HB 2006 preempts local land use laws, because this is a crisis and we need to act like it is one, so no.
TJ?
Yeah, any opportunity to notify our constituents what we're up to, I'll be in favor of, yes.
And Joel?
Yes.
Okay, motion carries 5-3. All right. Anything else on this topic? Did you have something, Doug? No, I thought I had a question. Okay. All right, thanks for being here tonight. All right, next up, public comment. This is an opportunity for the public to address the City Council on items not related to a public hearing or council action item that was before the council earlier tonight. The intent is to provide information that is pertinent to the city's jurisdiction. Each speaker will be given 3 minutes to address the City Council as one body, not two individuals. At the conclusion of public comment, council will have an opportunity to respond. This meeting will proceed in an effective and courteous manner. Citizens and council members will be allowed to state their positions in an atmosphere free from slander, threats, or other personal attacks. Signs or placards, outbursts of applause, campaigning for public office, or other disruptive behavior will not be tolerated. If you have a question regarding any government-provided service or a current city policy, please contact the city manager's office in an attempt to resolve the matter. And Judy Ahrens, I think, has left. Stephen Nelson. Stephen, can you check and see if the mic's on?
Okay, thank you for letting me speak. I'm going to speak again on the amended demolition ordinance, as there are so many reasons why I should do this. The health and safety of people living in Grants Pass is undoubtedly most important. But also, there are family pets and urban wildlife which need to breathe clean air. Illegal demolition projects can cause significant localized urban air quality concerns. Asbestos always gets the attention regarding demolition and health and safety concerns. I agree, asbestos is hazardous and needs to be regulated. But there are numerous hazards which, if airborne and inhaled, can adversely affect health. Here is a partial list. Fiberglass insulation, which is a composite material consisting of glass fibers in a formaldehyde resin. Meth chemical residue, lead, rat and mouse contamination, botulism, which is a nerve toxin produced by soil bacterium, and black mold. Incidentally, when Northridge Home Builders and Copeland illegally demolished structures in my neighborhood and thereby released a lot of hazardous dust consisting of black mold and fiberglass, my immune system went into overdrive for months. I will end my letter by asking a question. In the future, whenever demolition violations are reported and known by city officials, will the city enforce the demolition ordinance? And will this be done fairly and without favoritism? I will appreciate a response this evening for the public record. Obviously, this is important to me and should be to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, Rika Brown.
Rika Brown, Grants Pass. We moved to Grants Pass in 1999 and bought a house on Bridge Street in October. The first winter, our backyard flooded with water. In the lowest point of our backyard, I dug a small pond to capture the water and pump it out to the street. I eventually lined it with rubber and then rocks and made a watercourse and fall on the mound of dirt from the pond, lined and covered with rock. I put a pump in the pond and laid irrigation line to send excess water to the street, and added a line to the top of the watercourse so I could flip switches to change it from pumping out to recirculating and back. The next spring, I stuck a twisty willow twig in the ground on the other side of the mound. It grew fast and well, to about 50 feet tall and wide in about 10 years. Its girth is now 111 inches at 3 feet. For a twisty willow, it is very strong and has not lost any major branches in snowstorms like some have. The shade from that tree covers most of our backyard near the house after 1:00 p.m. and allows my grandkids to play on a little swing set and swim in an above-ground pool on hot days. It is vital to our use of our backyard. 2 years ago, I wanted to redo the pond liner, and we took the rocks and liner out and reshaped it a bit. Last winter, it refilled and stayed filled, despite the dry spring. And I decided that 20 years of water in it had compacted the soil sufficiently to leave out the liner and just replace the rocks. This summer, the ground within 6 feet of the pond on the opposite side from the willows stayed moist, but still firm underfoot, and our roses within that damp zone were happier than they had ever been. The willow apparently sucked water only from the soil and the pond on its side. It had no dieback and dropped far fewer twigs and leaves over this summer. On the other hand, this magnificent tree has become expensive over the years, and especially this year, as it sucks as much water as it needs because of the high and rapidly rising price of city water by the unit. This is another reason why we should not conserve water by rationing it through high unit rates. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else here who was wanting to speak tonight? Doug?
Yeah, Doug Walker, Grants Pass. I wanted to say, it is a long night. Thanks for your efforts to, I think they're called the parklets, little areas around the restaurants on H and G Street. I want to say thanks for that this past year. I think they were a big improvement to the community, and I sure hope they can come back again next year.
Thank you. All right, council, did you have any review for public comment tonight? Valerie?
I just want to Steve's question about the enforcement of the ordinance of the water. It's my understanding that in the ordinance for the water, for demolition, that somebody needs to be there to oversee it. Am I correct? Or what does the ordinance actually say?
So the ordinance, there's actually 4 sections in Article 24, and they really deal with dust suppression. And we do require a contractor or an owner to get a demolition permit if you're demolishing a structure. Now, we do this primarily because of the utility connections, and we have to make sure that they're capped off, and that's what we're inspecting. When we issue a demolition permit, it's the contractor's responsibility, and they do have to be a licensed contractor to demolish a building. It's their responsibility to do that according to the code. We don't have an inspector that's there. Today, this is how we operate. We don't have an inspector that's there on site at the time that that building is actually coming down. Mostly what our inspectors do is they go after the fact and verify that those utilities are capped off. So that's been our current practice. We do require that. You know, we have a traceable record for the SDCs because you can get SDC credits in the future for things like that. Oregon Department of Environmental Quality does regulate certain activities related to building, including handling of asbestos and things like that. So, and we do require a contractor to provide a copy of their asbestos permit at the time of a demolition. So that's our current practice, and I think to you know, any increase in our staffing, it would, you know, it'd be tough in terms of always being there on site. Now, we haven't seen a lot of these to date, so that's the way our development code currently reads.
Does the DEQ only have it for asbestos? Is that currently the only thing that they monitor?
I don't believe so. I think that's the report that actually gets generated that the building department requires. There may be other contaminants, but I would have to check on that.
So my last question does the contractor have to notify anybody, or does there have to be any notification when they are taking down a structure?
No.
No, okay.
Brian?
Just to follow along with that, is there any recourse for, say, a private citizen if they see a contractor out of compliance? How would they proceed with reporting that? Would they report that to the city, to the police, to the state? Do you have any idea of how that would go?
I don't know exactly what that reporting looks like.
If it's a DEQ issue, they could report it directly to DEQ. They have investigators, and the DEQ website even has a spot where you can submit a complaint.
Okay, thanks.
DJ?
I just wanted to add something that, at least in the circle that I am in with many others, the penalties, repercussions, remediations, and fines associated with noncompliance of demolition, asbestos, lead, not exclusive to, are prohibitive. And I personally don't know somebody that would undergo something like that without crossing their T's, dotting their I's. It's pretty severe.
That is through the DEQ, so.
That's correct.
Correct, okay.
Any further? Okay, Julie, emails.
We had one email against reconfiguring G Street, one email about not saving water, and one email from a person offering his property in Merlin as a location for a homeless camp.
Thank you. All right, consent agenda. TJ?
Before we begin, I think Joel has made a request about the consent agenda.
Okay.
Yeah, Mayor, I respectfully request that item B, the resolution creating a Sustainability and Energy Action Task Force, be presented to us on a Monday workshop. I think it needs discussion, and I'm glad that we're following through with our strategic plan.
Okay, that was item number B. Brian?
So it's my understanding that you can pull something off of the consent agenda to address it this evening, but I don't know about moving it to a workshop. I'm not familiar with that procedure.
Yeah, I agree. I think that would probably need a council vote. We could just move it to the end of, and have it be a separate vote.
I usually defer to the definition of the consent agenda being items included or of such routine nature or without controversy that they may be approved with a single action. And given that there is a counselor here that doesn't agree with it being routine and uniformly approved, I think that's telling that we need to honor the request.
Did you have something, Aaron?
Usually you've been asked or it's been starred and we have a presentation. Tonight we don't have a presentation ready to really address that issue in detail. It sounds like the council member wants to have further discussion. I don't know if staff is prepared for that, so if more detailed discussion is warranted, then maybe a workshop is appropriate based on his request.
Okay, let's just move it to the end and have it be a separate matter for the moment, and then we will address it separately. So if you could just skip that one, DJ, when you read the consent agenda.
Okay, we got item A, resolution authorizing the city manager to enter into an intergovernmental agreement with Josephine County to share public safety software technology. C, resolution authorizing the city manager to submit a building resilient infrastructure and communities grant application. I am not familiar with that one. D, resolution authorizing the city manager to purchase a replacement closed circuit television van for the collections division. We have motions from the historic local land, motion approving Riverside Park East Street historical local landmark designation findings of fact. Motion approving Caveman Bridge Highway at Highway 99 historic local landmark designation findings of fact. We have minutes of the council meeting and minutes of the COPA. And with that, I make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second, Valerie, thank you. All in favor of approving, I'll just go around and do it, approving the consent agenda?
Yes.
DJ, Joel,
Yes.
Valerie, Brian?
Yes.
Rob? Rick?
Yes.
Kurt? And Vanessa?
Yes.
Kurt just raised his hand. I see. I was waiting for the yes. Okay. Item B, a resolution creating a sustainability and energy action task force. Joel has asked for a workshop. Is there council interest? Do you want to vote on that tonight? Do you want to have it be a workshop? Brian?
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't this already at a workshop and that's why it's on consent, because it's already been at workshop and it was of such routine nature at this point that we put it on consent?
That was my recollection that this is the climate task force, right? Are they separate things? It's been previously discussed. Okay, Vanessa?
That was the point that I was going to make. Also, we did have a workshop on August 16th with all 8 counselors present and a unanimous vote to move it to a business meeting. So I'm not certain. Maybe you can help clarify why we would need to move it back again with a unanimous vote that's already been previously held.
So the reason I want to move it to a discussion item and a workshop is because I don't think any functional committee should be chartered without the council review. And the makeup of the committee, I think, needs to be looked at a little bit. And also, I think the council owes it to the committee to set the sideboards, much like we did with the swimming pool, as to what we want back. And the consent agenda does not give us the opportunity to do that. I just think it's good management.
Okay. Brian?
I think I'm just maybe looking for a little bit clarity on specifics here because, you know, the purpose and the qualifications of the members is outlined here, and we've been briefed on that and we approved that previously. So are there specific things that you're looking to address, or is it just going over it again?
I don't think that the council has looked at it in detail, and I think we need to have it as a presentation.
Okay. What's Valerie?
Again, you know, it's just like transparency, and there's nothing wrong with transparency, and there's nothing wrong with controversy, and this is a good thing to do. But we need to do it, and we need to define to the committee what we want back. I got some specific ideas. I don't know if you have specific ideas or not. But as to the questions that we need and what we want exactly from this committee. Or you just want to give them a blank slate and say, tell us what to do. So that's where I'm at.
Valerie?
Yes, I'm going to support Joel on this one because I do see, that I do remember the discussion, I do. And so I'm fine with that, but I don't really see the layout, who's going to be on the committee. And I know when we have the housing committee or, the CEDC or any of those committees, we were really clear on who was going to be on those committees.
It's on the second page.
Oh, it's on the second page. Oh.
It's a tricky one.
Okay.
All right, can somebody just make a motion on whether we're going to vote on this tonight or move it to a workshop, please? Valerie?
I'll make a motion to move it to a workshop. Or at least to a public, to where we can have a presentation by the council. I don't even know if we need to have it on a workshop, but just put it on the next meeting and have it as a council action. That would, I think, as opposed to a consent agenda. I think probably where it probably should have been taken off of the consent agenda was last Monday. Sorry, Joel. And then it could have had a presentation, and then we could have moved it forward. But I think that since he is asking for it to be off the consent agenda, I will respect that and just suggest we put it on the next meeting. I don't think 2 weeks is going to make a big difference.
Okay, so your motion is just to move it to the next business meeting in 2 weeks?
Yes.
Okay, is there a second? DJ? Is that a second? Okay, discussion, DJ?
Yeah, sure. I just want to also talk, I had some questions about cost implications or otherwise, and I very much so could have come in and asked those questions in the office for my personal fulfillment. But if this is something that's going to an action item that has a discussion, that would be right for that discussion. So I'm also going to be in favor of this in honor of Joel's request and some inquiry about costs associated.
Okay, is there further discussion about the motion, which is just to bump this down the road for 2 weeks?
So I was just before, I was needing clarity. It was to move it to the next business meeting, but is that as a consent item or as a council action
No,
item?
council action.
Okay.
Okay, so let's see, Valerie made the motion. How do you vote?
Yes.
Brian?
No.
Rob?
Yes.
Rick?
Yes.
Kurt?
No.
Vanessa?
No.
DJ?
Yes.
And Joel?
Yes.
All right, motion passes 5-3. We will move it to the next business meeting. Next up is the matters from mayor, council, and I will start off. I did submit, I think you all saw it, I sent it to you as well as the Board of Commissioners last week, kind of a rough framework for vaccination promotion proposal. And so we discussed it at the Board of Commissioners meeting last week. They weren't excited about it, to say the least. I wrote back to them, asked them if there were any portions of the proposal that they would be inclined to agree to, seeing as how they had repeatedly encouraged me to submit a proposal. And they wrote back today, and you probably saw it, but they just categorically denied the proposal and said that what they're already doing is good enough. They also indicated that perhaps I did not have the support of the council behind me. So I feel that I do, even though we haven't had a formal, vote on it. But just wanted to give you an update on where that stands now. They have spent at least $340,000 of the money. They have what they call a robust plan that includes radio ads, newspaper ads. They've sent out mailers. You probably received the first over the weekend. I did. It lists 21 locations in the county where you can get vaccinated. So they definitely are taking some steps to promote vaccinations in the county, and I think that's a really good step, but it has certainly been a very frustrating process trying to deal with this. As I think everybody understands, they did reject the state's funding initially. They told me that they would accept it on my behalf or on behalf of the city. They would get us those funds so that we could spend them. And then as soon as they did that, they decided to spend the funding themselves. So been a frustrating process, but I am encouraged, I guess, that they have done something positive with those funds, and hopefully it will encourage some more people around the county to get vaccinated, and we can move beyond this pandemic situation, because I'm certainly quite tired of being the mask police, and I'm ready for us to get back to normal, get our businesses back, fully open, get our kids back in school and activities, and not have to deal with this anymore. So that is my update for tonight. And with that, I will move on to council. Vanessa.
I wanted to make a motion to support the letter that Mayor Bristol has submitted to the county commissioners from the city council.
Thank you. Is there a second? Second from Kurt. Discussion? Rob.
I'm in complete disagreement with the mayor's letter to the to the commissioners. I wrote to the council, I wrote to the commissioners, and stated why. Again, tonight, there's just so much information that is not accurate. The mayor is spreading inaccurate information. These vaccines do not stop the spread. Dr. Rochelle Walensky has said that. The vaccines, so if we were to get more people vaccinated, that doesn't necessarily mean that our masks come off. There's a reason that 8 vaccinated people on this dais are still wearing masks, because the vaccines do not stop spread. So when you make statements like that, it gives the wrong impression that is not based in biological fact. So I really wish that you would be more careful in your position. You should be more careful and try to get things accurate. And if you don't know that's accurate, you should read the email that I sent back to you. I have a video there of Dr. Walensky and what she stated about the vaccines not stopping spread of the Delta variant. So for you to say otherwise leads people in the wrong direction, and it gives them inaccurate hope or inaccurate concept of what the power of the vaccine could be. These vaccines help the person who gets them potentially avoid extreme illness. It does nothing biologically beyond that, which is why you're wearing a mask tonight, which is why we're all wearing masks tonight, because your vaccine is not stopping you from spreading it or stopping you from getting it. You need to be more responsible and get your facts and ducks in a row and base it on what Dr. Walensky has said about it. And if you have any doubts about it, look at the email that I sent you.
Thank you. Joel?
Try to provide a little bit of levity. I met with a candidate for the Board of Forestry. This actually gets to the vaccines. The other day for breakfast, she used to be my supervisor, and she was she's a very astute woman. She's a very smart woman, Liz Agapawa, and she went on and became the congressional liaison for the chief of the U.S. Forest Service in her career, and then the regional forester down in Atlanta. And we had breakfast, and we were talking about different things. And she goes, Joel, how many issues do you know where 100% of the Americans agree with it? She goes, I didn't answer. She just kept on going. And she goes, none. So from her perspective, this is kind of old news and not worth our time. We're getting close to herd immunity if we're not already at it. There's going to be some people that disagree. There's going to be some people that agree passionately. I'm going to make a good decision for myself. I'm going to get vaccinated. And it's time to move on. I kind of feel like we're solving yesterday's problem. There's going to be new variants come out. Judy's going to look at the booster and see what we need for the booster. We got our flu shots. You know, to tell the American people that 100% of you need to do this is, frankly, not even relevant at this point in time. So I've moved on. And with all due respect to people that feel differently, it's a different way of dealing with some issues than Liz had seen before historically at the national level. And it's yesterday's issue.
Valerie?
I tend to agree with Joel, and I'm not going to vote to support it. I don't like the us and them. I feel like what we're doing is we're playing this shell game behind the scenes. I don't think that your recommendations were ever brought forth to the council for a vote to bring them forward, and no different than the public has not seen the letter that came from the county commissioners to us. So all this is kind of back behind the scenes stuff, and I am where Joel is. It's just like, it's time to move forward. We're not going to all agree on this, and to keep kind of shell gaming and pointing fingers to me is not professional, not worth the damage that is done to our constituents. I happen to agree with you, Sarah. I am vaccinated. I have my booster tomorrow, but that is, I'm not going to point fingers and have it the us against them mentality make my decision.
Brian?
I wish this hadn't drug on as long as it has, because at this point I think we're all kind of tired of it, even the mayor. So I get that. I don't know how many of you read the mayor's proposal that she sent, but she sent it to all of us. We all had the opportunity to read it and review it and provide feedback. In her proposal, it was very, it was promotional. It wasn't saying anything about, anything about COVID. It was more, promoting the vaccine in the community. It wasn't forcing anyone. It wasn't bribing anyone. It was just promoting. So, this has been drawn out for so long. I would just hate to send the message that, after all this time and effort that the mayor has put in, that we don't support her, because she has been working on this literally for months, and she's been getting nothing but jerked around by the commissioners on this. And so at this point, it's just honestly kind of, in my opinion, disrespectful to fall away from her on this, given that all the efforts that she's been putting in has just been trying to help our community get past this. Thanks.
All right, there's a motion on the table. That was a motion of support for the vaccination proposal, and Vanessa made the motion, so how do you vote?
Yes.
DJ?
No.
Joel?
No with respect.
No with
Valerie?
respect.
Brian?
Yes.
Rob?
No.
Rick?
Please restate the,
It was just a motion of support for the vaccination proposal that I submitted last week.
okay, unfortunately I'll abstain because I didn't read it, so thank you.
And Kurt?
Yes.
All right, motion fails, actually, 4 to 3 to 1. All right, anybody else with council comments? Valerie?
Yes, I would love to say a thank you to our people out in the county for passing the jail levy for us. That was wonderful to see the support, 60%, 66%. So that, and for the animal shelter. So I want to put a special thank you out to our constituents for recognizing the value and the hard work that our county has put forward in our city to keep us safe. So thank you for passage of that. And I would also like to give a congratulations to the Grants Pass. I mean, it's been wonderful to go up and down A Street, which I travel all the time, and to see the high school kids in school and be back to somewhat normal. But on a higher note, Grants Pass High School color band and color guard won first in the state for 4A championship this last weekend in Eugene with Louis Norfleet, the director. We also got high marks for our music and high visual. So that was a real honor for our community. And I just want to say, being a retired teacher from Grants Pass School District 7, I totally honor the commitment they have made in our community to music. They have kept music programs that most of the state has long given away. They've kept a focus on learning how to play instruments and band instruments from elementary school on and made that a priority, as well as physical education. And I think I would like to honor them for that. And I think the band and the color guard is a perfect example of how that has been a real positive in our community.
Thank you. Anybody else? Kurt?
I'll second what Valerie said. I was in Sherwood for that competition, and Grants Pass High School dominated that competition. I heard people talking with envy afterwards about how big Grants Pass was and how they were able to keep everybody going. And I will say Grants Pass travels well. There was a lot of people there. I also will say that in the stands, everybody was wearing masks and there was no drama. And everybody that I encountered that was not wearing a mask was wearing a Grants Pass sweatshirt. So.
Anybody else? All right, comments from staff tonight?
One, I want to get some clarification on the upcoming workshop we have on Urban Renewal Agency. We have a forum based per council's direction on urban renewal, and it's going to be a community forum, getting a listening session, getting ideas on programs for the Urban Renewal Agency. And that is the 30th of this month. So just confirming, so we're not missing the target, the upcoming Urban Renewal Agency discussion is going to be a listing of the 18 different programs we have, along with the associated resources with each one of those, and we'll talk about each one of those items, and then council will have open it up for council to have further discussions about the definitions of the items and or the resources allocated to each one. But it won't be addressing the grant programs because we're waiting for some feedback from the forum. Is that a good description of the workshop?
Brian?
That sounds good to me. The only other piece that I might include is maybe going into a little bit more detail about the caveman pool piece and bringing that in, because now that we've decided that's going to be the location. And since we're going to be talking about urban renewal anyway, I don't know if that needs to be completely separate, because it is.
We could address it at that same time. We'll be able to answer questions with regards to the annexation process and stuff.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Okay, just wanted that clarity.
All right.
Thank you.
Anything else? All right, how about a motion to adjourn? DJ?
I move to adjourn.
Second from Valerie, thank you. All in favor of adjourning? Any
Aye.
opposed? All right, see you next Monday.